Kenichi is a middle-aged guy, a total washout. He gets tossed into some other world with one trick up his sleeve, a cheat skill that hooks him up with an online shopping site. This story kicks off with a guy named Kenichi, who works himself into the ground until he lands in the hospital. Doctors tell him to chill for the sake of his heart, so he packs up and moves out to the wilderness for a peaceful life. Out there he grows some crops, hangs out with a few crows, and catches up on isekai anime while working on his writing. One day, while trying to order ingredients online, Kenichi suddenly vanishes and ends up in a strange new place. He stumbles across a corpse nearby and starts wondering if he's landed in some kind of fantasy world. With nothing to lose, he tries what he's seen in all those isekai shows. He calls for his status screen. To his shock, it works. The screen pops up confirming he's definitely in another world. But something's off. His health and magic points aren't listed. There are no skills either. The only thing showing up is something called Shangri-La. When he clicks on it, Kenichi realizes it's the same online shopping site he used back in his old life. The only other feature on the screen is an item box. Curious, he tests it out by storing some weeds. Turns out, it's simple to use and pulling stuff back out is just as easy. Right about then, Kenichi's stomach starts growling, so he tries to get food through Shangri-La. But the screen tells him he needs money, and he's got nothing. Being resourceful, Kenichi gets an idea. He figures out he can trade items from his item box for cash. Unfortunately, the weeds he picked up are worthless. Desperate for something valuable, his eyes land on the sword sticking out of the corpse. Kenichi trades the sword for almost 100,000 yen and finally gets himself some food. After eating, he buries the body and thanks it for saving his life. With some cash to spare, Kenichi buys a bike, a pair of boots, and a compass from Shangri-La. Using the compass, he sets off to find a settlement where he can earn more money. Taking a break, Kenichi cooks himself a meal with the supplies he ordered. That's when a light bulb goes off. He can use his online shop to buy stuff, sell it in this world for a profit, and stack up even more cash. Feeling good about his plan, Kenichi digs into his food, but his peace doesn't last. Out of nowhere, terrifying monsters start crawling out of the forest. Panicking, he pulls up Shangri-La, searching for weapons. The monsters are closing in fast, and the only weapon he finds is a bow. But there's one big problem: he has no idea how to use it. Kenichi settles on grabbing some fireworks, hoping they'll buy him a little time. They work, but not for long. Desperate, he snags a slingshot just in time, and it's a game changer. He manages to take out a few of the beasts and keeps firing, refusing to back down. Eventually, the wolves get spooked and take off, and Kenichi doesn't stick around either. Using the headlamp he bought, he navigates through the dark and puts as much distance as he can between himself and the danger. By the next day, Kenichi is relieved to spot a city off in the distance. On his way there, he crosses paths with a merchant named Fayu. Fayu offers him a ride to the city, and Kenichi gladly hops aboard. Fayu introduces Kenichi to another passenger, and they strike up a conversation. Kenichi mentions his plan to start doing business in the city, but Fayu notices he isn't carrying any gear. That's when it clicks: Kenichi must have an item box. The other passenger confirms it by pulling out an instrument from her own item box. She starts singing a song about their little journey and says this is where Kenichi's story truly begins. Once they reach the city, Kenichi thanks Fayu for the ride by handing him some pepper as a gift. Fayu is impressed, but also a little freaked out. He asks if Kenichi plans to sell this in the city. Fayu explains that selling pepper could get Kenichi in serious trouble. There's a spice syndicate in the city called Bacopa, and they've got a stranglehold on the spice trade. Even so, Fayu offers to pay for the pepper. Kenichi says it was a gift, but Fayu, being a proud merchant, insists on paying. This becomes Kenichi's first official sale. After Fayu leaves, Kenichi does some quick math and is blown away by how valuable pepper is here. That night, Kenichi heads to a restaurant that doubles as an inn. The receptionist greets him, and he pays 1 silver for a room. When she asks him to sign his name, Kenichi freezes, doesn't know how to write in this world's language. The receptionist notices his strange clothes and asks what his deal is. Kenichi explains it's related to his business. She tells him the Merchants Guild won't register anyone who can't read, write, or do math. Kenichi quickly clears up that he's no fool. He just doesn't know the local writing system. To test him, she gives him a quick math problem, and he nails it easily. She's impressed but points out that reading and writing are still an issue. She helps him out by teaching him how to write his name. Afterward, she introduces herself as Azalea. Kenichi asks if she'd be willing to teach him how to read and write in this country's language. Kenichi sweetens the deal by offering Azalea some candy from another country. As soon as she tastes it, she's hooked. The candy is ridiculously good, and Azalea feels like royalty just eating it. She even jokes that nobles would snatch it away if they knew about it. Her loving the candy is cool and all, but Kenichi nudges her to start teaching him already. After a while, Kenichi realizes the language isn't too far off from what he knew back in his old world. Azalea's impressed by how fast he's picking it up and tells him she's sure he'll make an amazing merchant. She's so confident in his future success that she jokes about becoming his mistress one day. Kenichi, being quite a bit older, tells her she should forget about that idea. Of course, he only makes things awkward when he sketches a portrait of her. Azalea once again is blown away by his skills. Between the candy and the drawing, she feels pretty special and decides she has to pay him back somehow. The next morning, Kenichi heads to the Merchants Guild to handle the paperwork. The registration fee is 1 silver, but his funds are running low. He's down to 116,000 yen. But luckily they let him pay in installments and issue his guild ID. Outside, Kenichi wanders through the market, checking out prices to get a feel for the local economy. A plain plate goes for a small square silver, roughly 5,000 yen. 2 sheets of slightly brown paper cost 1 copper, about 1,000 yen. He spots some knives and notes their price too. Then he picks up a mixed bag of strange-looking fruit from a vendor with a quirky sales pitch. The fruit names pop up in his item box, but they don't make much sense to him. Later, Azalea sees the fruit and lights up. Heard of them before and absolutely loves them. Back in his room, Kenichi tries to figure out what his big goal should be, but ends up passing out before he gets anywhere. The next day, he uses some supplies he bought, including a hammer, to build himself a stand. Azalea is amazed by the clothespins he's using, complains about the ones she uses always breaking, but his are way sturdier. She tells him they could be valuable, which catches Kenichi off guard. A little later, Kenichi surprises a sweet old lady by summoning his stand right next to hers. Once everything's set up, the lady Anama ends up buying 5 clothespins for 1 copper, welcomes Kenichi to the area and sticks around to chat. As hours pass, Anama points out how quickly his clothespins are selling. Thanks to Kenichi's stand, her sales pick up too, and she hopes he never leaves. Kenichi's happy the clothespins are raking in money, but he's no fool, knows it's only a matter of time before others start copying his idea and selling their own versions. Out of nowhere, some kid shows up, and Kenichi instantly recognizes this guy as someone with serious status. The guy checks out one of Kenichi's knives. Kenichi demonstrates how easily it slices through stuff. The price is 2 silver. It's pricey, but the guy has never seen a blade this sharp and clean. The knife feels a little small for him, though, so he asks if Kenichi has anything bigger. Kenichi searches his item shop. Finding what he needs is tricky due to certain restrictions, but he pulls up a sword. The guy is amazed by how stunning it looks. The price is 1 gold coin. It's a lot of money, but the guy is hooked. Struggles to decide, while Kenichi wonders if the price might be too high. It's clear the guy is ready to spend big, so Kenichi stays confident. Before the sale finishes, a small cat person shows up sniffing around the stand. Other cat folks call her out for going overboard. It's Kenichi's first time seeing beast folk, so he apologizes for his reaction. One of the cats jumps onto his stand and points at the roof, saying he wants to buy it. Kenichi laughs, saying the roof isn't for sale, but then remembers he can always get more. The cat person decides to buy 3 roofs, so Kenichi offers a discount, shaving off 1 copper from the total. The cats don't have copper coins or seem to understand math. Kenichi quickly does the calculations for them. They seem skeptical, but the blonde guy steps in backing Kenichi's math. The cats finally agree to the deal. With that done, the blonde guy says he's ready to buy the sword. That night, Kenichi uses his earnings to pay for 5 nights at the inn. Meanwhile, in a noble's mansion, a lady admires the clothespins her maid bought. She's amazed by their quality and plans to sell them through her company. Determined to take advantage of the opportunity, she heads off to find her father. Back at the inn, Kenichi sets up for a bath using a small tub he bought. While browsing Shangri-La, he spots something called a drum bath and considers filling it with water and heating it over a fire. After all his shopping, Kenichi starts questioning how this online shop even works. The screen's light doesn't brighten his surroundings. He has no idea how the deliveries even reach him. A thought creeps in, it might demand something in return, maybe even his soul. The idea feels too heavy, so Kenichi decides to stop thinking about it. Elsewhere, a girl attacks a pigeon to get some food. She freezes when someone calls out to her, silently pleading for whoever it is to move along without noticing her. The next day, while Kenichi is setting up his shop, he decides to freshen up his inventory a bit. He puts out some jewelry for sale, not expensive gems or anything, but they're pretty enough to turn a profit. While he's organizing, Margaret, the maid from yesterday, shows up. She says she's back to buy more clothespins. Kenichi asks how many she wants, and she hits him with a shocker 100. He's surprised but quickly finalizes the sale since she's got the money ready. As Kenichi packs up her order, Margaret notices the jewelry he set out and asks if they're real diamonds. He explains they're just polished glass, but they look nice enough to catch attention. Margaret seems impressed and asks him to hold one for her so she can buy it later. The rest of the day goes smoothly, with business as usual. Just as Kenichi's about to close shop, the beast folk from yesterday show up again. Their serious expressions make him nervous, thinking they might be here to cause trouble. Before he can say anything, the cat girl Miley gets right up in his face, sniffing around. She confidently tells the others she smells spices coming from him. The beast folk light up with excitement, asking Kenichi to sell them some of his spices. He hesitates, remembering what he heard about the spice syndicate and how dangerous it might be if they catch him selling. Not wanting to risk it, he explains that he can't sell them any. The beast folk keep pleading, but locals nearby step in, telling them they can't expect a newcomer like Kenichi to put his business in jeopardy for them. The beast folk back off, seeming to understand. Kenichi, feeling bad for them, comes up with an idea. He figures sharing a meal with them wouldn't technically break any rules, so he invites them to join him for dinner, but they'll need to meet him in the woods to avoid attracting attention. The beast folk are thrilled and agree. Later that night, they meet Kenichi and Anama on the outskirts of town, ready to cook up a feast. Kenichi starts prepping the meal, and Anama offers to help. He asks her to chop some veggies, but when Anama gets a look at the produce, she's stunned by how vibrant and juicy they are. Kenichi explains they're imported from another country and guarantees they taste amazing. While Kenichi and Anama handle the veggies, Miley and the other beast folk head to the river to catch some fish. It doesn't take long before they manage to reel in a solid haul. With all the ingredients ready, Kenichi starts prepping the fish, seasoning it with spices before tossing everything into a pot to cook. After a while, the meal is ready and the beast folk can't get enough of it. They've never tasted anything this good before and thank Kenichi repeatedly for the feast. But as they eat, the good food starts making them crave some alcohol. Anama tells them to calm down, reminding them that booze is expensive. Kenichi doesn't see the harm in letting them have a little, so he pulls out a bottle, pours a few glasses and hands them out. He makes them promise, though they can't tell anyone about the meal he made for them. Anama warns Kenichi that he's being too generous, but he shrugs it off. He figures the beast folk deserve to enjoy themselves, especially since they seem like decent people. That night, they eat, drink, and even bathe together before eventually crashing under the stars. Miley seems to be warming up to Kenichi, so she decides to sneak into his bed. The next morning, Kenichi gets back to the inn. Azalea doesn't look happy and lets him know she's upset he stayed out all night. Kenichi tries to explain he was just hanging out with some beast folk outside town, but Azalea spots Cat Lady fur on his jacket and jumps to conclusions. She accuses him of doing a lot more than just hanging out, and she's mad he picked a cat lady over her. Later, as Kenichi is setting up his shop for the day, Margaret shows up with a stunning woman named Primula. Kenichi is briefly distracted by Primula's beauty, but quickly snaps out of it when he sees Margaret standing behind her. He realizes they're here for the necklace Margaret asked about the day before. He pulls out the necklace, and Margaret pays for it before giving it to Primula. As Primula examines it, she's impressed by the craftsmanship, can't believe it's not made of real diamonds. Primula asks if Kenichi has more necklaces like this, so he grabs a bunch from his item box and shows them to her. Primula is blown away, not just by the quality of his goods, but also by the fact that he has an item box. She then makes a request, introduces herself as the daughter of the owner of the Mallow Trading Company, and tells Kenichi she'd like him to meet her father. If he's willing to come with her, she'll make the introduction. Kenichi likes the idea of meeting the owner of a big trading company, but he's a little nervous about getting involved with someone so influential. Trouble always seems to follow when big players are involved. Anama reassures him, saying Primula's father is well known around town for being fair and trustworthy, so she tells Kenichi he doesn't need to worry about dealing with him. Hearing that, Kenichi decides to go along. Primula invites him to join her in her carriage so they can head to her father's place. On the way, Primula shows Kenichi some clothespin replicas her craftsman made. While they got the wooden part right, the metal clamp is way off. She admits it was too complicated for them to figure out. Kenichi isn't surprised, doesn't even know how the springs are made himself, just that it's a tricky process. When they arrive at Primula's home, Kenichi is blown away by how massive the house is. Primula laughs and tells him it's actually small compared to the mansions nobles around here live in. They head inside, and Primula introduces Kenichi to her father Mallow. The two exchange greetings, and Mallow invites Kenichi to sit down so they can talk business. Once Kenichi is settled, he shows Mallow some of the jewelry he brought. Mallow is just as impressed as Primula was. Then Primula mentions that Kenichi has an item box, which catches Mallow's attention. Mallow reveals that he also has an item box, and it's one of the reasons he was able to build his trading company into what it is today. He points out that if Kenichi uses his item box wisely, he could go far. For now though, Kenichi's just using it to store supplies. Mallow gets straight to the point, saying he wants Kenichi to become an official supplier for the Mallow Trading Company. Kenichi had a feeling something like this was coming and figures Mallow is looking to maximize profits by locking in an exclusive deal. But if that's the goal, Kenichi asks why Mallow didn't just keep buying from his shop at low prices and resell the items for more later. Mallow admits he could have done that, but it's a shady move, and he respects Kenichi enough to avoid that kind of tactic. Plus, if Kenichi found out, he wouldn't be too happy about it. Mallow adds that having this direct conversation gives him an advantage over his competitors, who would probably try to approach Kenichi sooner or later. With that out of the way, Mallow proposes starting their partnership negotiations, offers to pay Kenichi 50% of the retail price for his goods. Kenichi could have played hardball for a better deal, but honestly he's already stacking major coins from his online store, so he goes along with Mallow's offer without a fuss. They lock it down with a solid handshake, making it official. That first shipment of goods Kenichi sends off brings in over 1,000,000 yen worth of coins, and he's feeling pretty good about how things are shaping up. Then, things take a turn when Primula lays eyes on the stash of gorgeous jewels Kenichi's been holding. She's instantly hooked, absolutely loving what she sees. She hits her dad Mallow with a quick plea to let her buy them straight off Kenichi. Mallow's cool with it, so Primula offers 10 gold coins, that's a whopping 2,000,000 yen, to snag the jewels for herself. For Kenichi, this is a major win, the first time he's seen his bank balance hit 8 figures since landing in this world, and it's starting to feel like he's really found his groove. With cash piling up, Kenichi figures it's time to start setting up that peaceful life he's been dreaming about. So he picks out a house from his online store and heads outside the city walls, making his way into the forest to scout out the perfect spot. Before heading out, he fills Azalea in on his plan, so she doesn't freak out or worry too much. She still finds it weird that Kenichi wants to live out in the dangerous forest instead of staying safe in the city. Once he settles on a solid location, Kenichi gets down to business. First things first, he grabs a weed whacker and starts clearing the area. He quickly realizes fuel costs are ridiculously high even in this world, but he doesn't let it slow him down. He powers through, cutting a clear path into the forest. Next up, he's got to handle the trees. He pulls out a chainsaw and starts chopping them down one by one. After hours of hard work, he's got a pile of trees ready to go. But there's a problem: the logs are way too long to fit in his item box. Not one to back down from a challenge, Kenichi cranks up the chainsaw again and starts breaking the logs into smaller, manageable pieces. Finally, they fit into his item box, and he's one step closer to getting the job done. With most of the trees cleared, only the stumps are left. But that's a whole different beast. The sun's already setting, so Kenichi decides to call it a day and come back tomorrow to wrap things up. The next day, Kenichi's back at it, ready to tackle the stumps. So he starts digging around one, but quickly realizes this is way too much work for a middle-aged guy like him. He's not about to wreck his back over this, so he makes the smart move and buys himself a backhoe to handle the heavy lifting. When Kenichi finally sees the backhoe, it hits him he just dropped 1.2 million yen on heavy machinery because he didn't feel like doing manual labor. For a second he regrets it, but then he remembers how much easier it'll make his life and decides it's probably worth the investment. He fires up the engine, only to realize the thing runs on diesel, and his store doesn't sell diesel at all. Panic sets in as he thinks about how much money he just wasted if he can't even use it. After thinking it over, Kenichi figures he might be able to make his own diesel by mixing kerosene with some additives. But before he goes all in, he realizes that messing up the mix could ruin the engine. Playing it safe, he tests his homemade diesel on a generator first. So once he fills it up and turns it on, it works perfectly. Relieved, he knows the mixture will work for the backhoe, so he plans to head back to the forest the next day to finish the job. In the meantime, Kenichi decides he needs to deal with the bugs swarming the area. The next day, he visits a local magic shop to buy some bug-repellent magic stones. As soon as he walks in, the shop's wizard greets him and asks where he's from since he hasn't seen him around before. Kenichi explains he's a foreigner who recently opened a shop in town and is looking to buy bug-repellent stones. The wizard tells him the stones cost 3 silver coins, but that's way too expensive for Kenichi. He tries to haggle, offering 2 oranges in exchange for a lower price. The wizard, having never seen oranges before, assumes they're some kind of rare exotic fruit. Clearly impressed, he agrees to give Kenichi a discount. Later that day, Kenichi chats with Anama, who tells him the wizard is a super knowledgeable guy and someone good to have as a friend. She also mentions the complete opposite Shaga, a wanted criminal whose posters are plastered all over town. Shaga leads a notorious bandit group, and there's a huge bounty on his head. That same night, Shaga organizes a raid on a carriage full of slaves being transported. Whatever his plans are for them, it's definitely bad news. The next day, Kenichi heads back to the forest to finally put his backhoe to work. All his earlier doubts about the purchase are gone. The backhoe doesn't just make the job easier, it's actually fun to use. Now nothing's stopping him from chasing his dream of a quiet life in the woods. But after dropping so much cash on the backhoe, Kenichi's wallet is running dangerously low. Realizes he'll have to put his construction plans on hold for a while until he can make more money. Later, Kenichi rolls up to Mallow with some sugar to sell. Mallow breaks it to him that sugar and salt are government-controlled goods, so they can't buy them from him no matter how sweet the deal. Kenichi's bummed since he thought he'd rake in some serious cash with it. But Mallow flips the vibe, saying Kenichi's jewelry has been a huge hit. Mallow, curious, asks if he's got more to show, and Kenichi pulls out his newest pieces, leaving everyone amazed. That sale nets him another 3 million yen worth of gold and silver, stacking his bag even higher. With his wallet looking good, Kenichi finally splurges on a log cabin. He's hyped at first, thinking he scored a great deal, but his excitement crashes when the delivery arrives. The cabin isn't assembled, it's just a pile of planks. Kenichi realizes why it was so cheap, but no turning back now. He gears up to tackle the build, feeling as if he's gambling with his sanity. Luckily, the assembly's straightforward, and the beastfolk he helped earlier swing by to lend a hand, paying him back for the meals he shared with them. Meanwhile, Kenichi keeps grinding at his stall selling his goods. Weeks fly by, and he picks up a grill to keep the beastfolk fed while they help, plus a little one-man tent so he can camp near the build site. All their hard work pays off, and in under a month his new crib is finally done. They celebrate big at the end, and Kenichi makes sure to grab essentials like a bed and blankets for his new place. But he knows the work's not over yet. He's got to figure out electricity. Plus, he's thinking about giving the walls and roof a fresh coat of paint. Over the next month, Kenichi keeps adding touches. He builds a garden, puts up a fence, and rigs the bathroom to recycle waste into fertilizer. That fancy toilet alone sets him back 200,000 yen, and the kitchen sink costs another 30,000. For power, he installs 20 solar panels hooked up to a battery system, running him nearly 400,000 yen. His best buy, though, is a drum bath for 25,000 yen. He hauls water from the river in gas tanks, and the first real bath he's had since landing in this world feels like heaven. Kenichi kicks back, taking it all in. He declares his new slow life in this world has officially started. It's his place, his rules, and his domain. Later, Kenichi swings by Azalea to let her know he won't be staying at the inn anymore. She surprises him by saying she's the one who owes him thanks. The next morning, Kenichi wakes up in his new home, grabs his camera, and sets off to snap pictures of the wilderness around him. Kenichi's living his best slow life dream out in the forest, but things take a wild turn real quick. While wandering around, he accidentally sets off a trap, and before he knows it, he's dodging arrows. Turns out the beast folk nearby aren't too thrilled about him setting up shop in their woods. They're talking about ending him, and Kenichi realizes how rough this world can get. Not one to back down, he channels his inner action hero. He grabs his slingshot, fires shots, and lights up the beast folk with fireworks to freak them out. Then he cranks up his backhoe and sends them running for their lives. After the chaos dies down, Kenichi stumbles upon an injured bobcat caught in the crossfire. The poor thing's got an arrow stuck in it and isn't letting anyone near. Kenichi wants to help but knows it could lash out. Thinking quick, he orders floor cushions and a neck guard as makeshift armor to keep himself safe. With his gear on, Kenichi carefully removes the arrow and disinfects the wound. He picks up antibiotics and painkillers to help the cat heal and feel better. He's still worried it might not make it. He even tries putting it in his item box, hoping it'll help. But that idea flops. So he carries the bobcat back home and sets it up with a comfy pet blanket. The cat doesn't move much, and Kenichi starts worrying it might not survive. He heads to the old mage in town for advice, but the guy's no help, just talks about selling the cat's hide for cash. Anama doesn't have better ideas either, but Miley does. She tells him bobcats are considered messengers of the Supreme Being and offers to check on it. Back at home, Kenichi's relieved to see the cat eating again. Miley takes a look and figures out that the dogmen were behind the arrow attack. To keep the bobcat from licking its wound, Kanishi buys it a collar. Miley is impressed by how much effort Kanishi's putting in to save the cat and decides to thank him on its behalf. She goes out and hunts birds, and Kanishi grills them up using his portable setup. A little seasoning later, and Miley's blown away by how good it tastes. She's so into it, she asks to stay the night to watch over the bobcat. She doesn't even care that Kanishi's place only has one bed. A few days later, the bobcat's looking a lot better, so Kanishi shifts focus to farming. He buys plants and fertilizer from Shangri-La, but he knows running to the river for water every time isn't going to cut it. But now he's thinking about digging a well to make life a little easier. That night, Kanishi has this weird dream, only to wake up and find the bobcat nudging him. Looks like it's doing way better now, even has the energy to head outside. It bolts off into the night, and Kanishi, watching it disappear, casually wishes it a good life. Over the next few days, Kanishi skips working his stall to focus on building a well. He ends up buying an earth drill and an electric pump, spending a week and about 50,000 yen in total. Finally, he's got running water. One afternoon, Primula shows up after noticing he wasn't at his stall for a while. Turns out Miley told her where he's been hanging out. She's amazed by everything he's built and curious about the big hunk of metal sitting behind his house. Kanishi smoothly explains that it's his loyal servant, calling it his familiar. This makes Primula think he's some kind of mage. Kanishi doesn't deny it and asks her to keep his magic skills under wraps. He casually mentions that the city gates will be locked soon and asks if she plans to stay the night. Primula flips it around, acting like he's the one suggesting it. When he points out he only has one bed, she brushes it off. She's more interested in the fact that Kanishi even has a bath. Later that evening, Primula tries to use the bath, but gets spooked by the dark. She asks Kanishi to stick around for safety. He makes sure everything's good with the bath setup, but tells her she could wait till morning if it's an issue. Primula refuses, she's not passing up this chance. Kanishi warns her, saying, "You barely know me. What if I'm some shady guy?" But she waves it off. She's already heard about all the nice stuff he's done for Miley, so she trusts him. Afterward, Kanishi buys her a bathrobe, and Primula lights up, suggesting they sell it. He tells her it's not for sale, but she insists customers would love it. Kanishi agrees to a limited run, and she's thrilled. He even surprises her with an 8,000 yen nightgown, and she's blown away by its quality. She teases that he might end up as the top merchant in the kingdom. Kanishi quickly shoots that down, saying the last thing he wants is noble attention. He just wants enough money for a quiet life with good food. Primula promises that the Mallow company will keep his identity a secret. Before bed, Kanishi impresses her with a sketch of her, and they call it a night. In the middle of the night, Primula sneaks a glance to see if he's awake. But Kanishi, playing it cool, pretends to be asleep. Elsewhere, we see the mysterious girl being mistreated by the bandits. The leader Shaga looks pretty satisfied with the loot they've collected. One of his men informs him about a new job they've been hired for, and Shaga seems eager to get started. The next morning, Kanishi takes Primula back home, bracing himself for the inevitable questions from her father about why she spent the night. To his surprise, Mallow simply thanks him for looking after her, casually expressing his worry about who she takes after with her boldness. Kanishi shifts gears and shows Mallow the bathrobes he's been working on, highlighting their high-quality material. He even jokingly pulls out some lingerie, mentioning it's used in nighttime battles, which leaves Mallow overwhelmed and stammering. Kanishi laughs, saying it was a joke. While they're talking, Mallow's maid walks in with a stack of papers. Mallow explains that the nation recently updated its ledger-keeping system because someone in a neighboring empire introduced double-entry bookkeeping. This catches Kanishi off guard since it's something straight out of his old world. Mallow goes on to explain how this system has rapidly advanced the empire, all thanks to some genius inventor. Mallow invites Kanishi to check out a new prototype product he recently purchased. When Kanishi sees it, he's stunned it's a pitcher pump, something else from his old world. Mallow is impressed that Kanishi recognizes it, but Kanishi can't shake the feeling that there's another person from his world here, owning his skills. Feeling competitive after hearing all the praise for this mystery inventor, Kanishi tries to show off by sketching a design for a new kind of vehicle. Unfortunately, the design looks ridiculous to them, and they burst out laughing, thinking it's some kind of joke just like the lingerie he mentioned earlier. Over time, Primula starts visiting Kanishi more frequently, even staying over. During one of these visits, she reveals she's heading out on a business trip that'll keep her away for a month. Before leaving, she boldly asks Kanishi for one of his see-through designs. Kanishi assumes she's trying to impress some guy and teases her about it. Primula surprises him by confirming it, but drops the twist he's right here. Kanishi, clueless as ever, tells her she deserves better and shouldn't waste her time falling for an old guy like him. Primula knows Kanishi is a good man and explains that her father doesn't mind her spending time with him. Kanishi feels awkward about it, but decides to leave things as they are. Primula doesn't give up entirely and asks if they can share the same bed. Kanishi agrees, though he still can't understand what she sees in an older guy like him. The next morning, after Primula returns to town, Kanishi gets an unexpected visit. An armored man arrives. It's Paul, the same guy who bought a sword from him earlier. Paul explains that he's investigating rumors about a strange man living in the forest and begins questioning Kanishi about his unusual items. Kanishi plays it off, saying it's all tied to magic. Paul asks if he's a mage, and Kanishi tells him to keep that secret. To ensure Paul's silence, Kanishi gives him a stash of steel. Since he doesn't have any more swords in stock, he advises Paul to take the steel to a blacksmith to have one forged. Paul, grateful for the gesture, decides to share some interesting news as thanks. Paul mentions hearing about a mage in the Empire who has a unique spell no one's seen before. This spell creates a yellowish dipping sauce called mayo something. Kanishi freezes as Paul confirms the name, mayonnaise. Kanishi is stunned but listens as Paul continues. He reveals that the same mage used mayonnaise to defeat a dangerous dragon. Kanishi can't believe it. Taking down a dragon with mayo sounds unbelievable. He's left wondering what kind of person from his old world managed to reincarnate in the Empire and pull off something so bizarre. A whole month's passed since Primula left, and Kanishi figures the Mallow Trading Company's caravan should be rolling back into town any day now. He plans to drop by later to catch up with Primula, but before he even gets that far, he picks up on some commotion in town and heads over to see what's going on. From the chatter around him, he finds out that a caravan got attacked and Primula has been snatched. He spots Mallow begging them adventurers passing by to help save his daughter. But nobody's paying him no mind because she got taken by Shaga. Even the guild and the knights turned him down, telling him it will take days to get a crew together. Kanishi watches the whole thing go down, seeing Mallow broken and desperate, and he can't help but feel for the man. The crowd ain't stepping up either. Nobody wants to go up against a bandit boss rolling with 50 men. They just stand there, feeling sorry for Mallow, while he keeps crying and pleading for somebody to help get his daughter back. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Primula gets thrown in a cell. She glares at the bandits, demanding to know what they're planning to do with her. Shaga steps up, smirking, telling her that she has a body that would make any man drool for her. So it is no surprise some horny noble wants her. Back in town, Mallow is straight up on his knees now, begging Kanishi to step in. Kanishi hesitates for a second, then tells him he is going to bring her back. He knows this ain't smart. He ain't got the kind of experience to be taking on a whole crew of bandits, but there are moments in life when a man got to stand his ground. He tells Mallow he is going to need some cash to get things ready, and Mallow hands it over without a second thought. Meanwhile, some cat folk who have been watching the whole scene slip away to track down Miley. Mallow tells Kanishi that the base of the bandits is roughly 40 leagues west of this place, sitting in some old castle ruins on the mountainside. Kanishi thinks that he is going to need a ride if it is 50 kilometers from here, and he decides to buy a truck. He then asks everyone around the area to step back because he is going to use summoning magic, and when they step back, he buys the truck. He gets on top of it, explaining to everyone that this is a metal carriage that will do whatever he tells it to, and he asks everyone if any of them is willing to help him in this mission. He offers them weapons and tries to entice them with the high bounty on Shaga's head, telling them that they can do this as long as they have a good plan. However, no one comes forward to help him. They think that they will stand no chance against a group of bandits, which is 50 men strong, and the Bobcat gets onto his truck. Kanishi realizes that it wants to join him, and he thanks it for this. Just then, the cat folk come there as well, and they are glad that they made it on time. They mention that they will accompany him on his mission, and he thanks them as well. Kanishi then gives them some weapons, and he arms the catfolk with an axe and some long machetes, and he gives Miley a bow. Just then Paul shows up there, offering to accompany them, and Kanishi is glad to have him, but he wonders why he is in full armor. Paul explains that he went to pick up his sword, and he wanted to get in the spirit of things, so he put on his full armor. He shows his sword, and Kanishi realizes that he had this made with the steel he gave him. Paul mentions that hunting Shaga and his gang will be a good first mission for his wolf fang, and the old mage decides to accompany them as well. Kanishi tells him that this is not a mission for an old man, but the mage tells him that he used to be an adventurer. He fires a fireball, mentions that he will be useful in combat, and states that he is also curious about the magic that Kanishi uses. so Kenichi decides to take him along, and Anama wants in on the action as well. Kenichi points out that they are going to fight and not sell merchandise, and she mentions that she might not be of use in fighting, but she can still cook their meals. He decides to bring her along since she insists, and he asks the people gathered around if they want to come with them. But they do not want anything to do with this, and they vacate the area. Just then Mallow steps up, saying he wants to roll with Kenichi, but Kenichi shakes his head, telling him he needs to get that wound patched up first. He tells him not to stress, Primula is coming home safe. Mallow nods, feeling better hearing that. After that, Kenichi heads over to the guild, drops a silver coin, and signs himself up. He puts in an official request to take down Shaga. Next his crew heads out, and people watching them whisper among themselves, thinking they are just running off with Mallow's money. No way, a bunch of amateurs are taking down Shaga. Kenichi does not pay them any mind, and they roll out of town. Meanwhile, over in the bandits' hideout, Anemone hands Primula some bread for lunch. But Primula notices Anemone looks hungry too, so she tells her to eat it instead. As she eats, Primula asks if she is a prisoner too. She tells her not to worry, they are getting out together. Anemone asks how, and Primula tells her someone is coming for them. Anemone tilts her head, asking if she is talking about God. Seeing that innocent look on her face, Primula just nods. Kenichi and his crew keep pushing forward, and by evening they set up camp and grab some food. Later, Kenichi breaks down the plan to take on the bandits. Nobody has a problem with it. Anama steps up, saying she is staying back since she would only slow them down. After that, Miley heads off to scout ahead. Kenichi hands her a transceiver so they can keep in touch. The moment she hears his voice coming through, she is blown away. Kenichi smirks, telling her it is a magic item that lets them talk over long distances. The old mage watches, mumbling that even the Empire probably does not have tech like this. Kenichi chuckles, telling him to act like he has not seen anything. Since Miley is already ahead, Kenichi figures it is time to move. Before leaving, he tells Anama that if he is not back in a day, she needs to head straight to the Adventurers Guild and report that the mission to take down the bandits failed. She nods, understanding what is at stake. With that, Kenichi and the crew press on into the night. After a while, they roll up on the bandits' camp, and the night's already settled in. Miley sneaks up, scoping the place, then lets Kenichi know the watchtowers got guards, and the ones inside are getting wasted. Kenichi figures this is the time to move in. Since he's never been in a real fight before, one of the cat folk hands him something that looks like a nut, telling him to eat it. He pops it in his mouth, then realizes too late it's some kind of drug. His head gets light, his whole body buzzes, and he's feeling way too good for someone about to step into a bloodbath. He hops in his truck and tells Miley to take out the guards. The guards in the tower catch sight of the truck rolling in, trying to figure out if it's some kind of beast, but before they can react, Miley drops them both. She slides back into the truck, and the old mage throws out Megumis's signature explosion spell, blowing the castle gates sky high. That gets the whole camp on high alert, and the bandits rush inside. Kenichi turns to the old man for another blast, but he's drained, got nothing left. The crew jumps out of the truck, ready to handle business. The cat folk go to work, slicing through the bandits one by one. The knight tests out his new sword, cutting down anything in his path. A bandit makes a move on Kenichi, but the bobcat jumps in, and Miley puts a bullet in the guy before he gets the chance. The noise draws the rest of the bandits out, and that's when Kenichi pulls out his backhoe. He floors it, plowing straight into them, and the ones who don't get hit scatter in fear. Everybody's putting in work, and it's clear these bandits are nothing but second-rate. They can't even land a scratch on Kenichi's crew. While the bandits scramble, Kenichi starts pressing them, demanding to know where Primula is. He steers the backhoe toward a corner and stumbles on an underground holding cell. Inside, he spots Anemone and a bunch of other captives. Anemone takes one look at Kenichi and starts wondering if he's some kind of supreme being. Kenichi scans the place but doesn't see Primula. That's when Shaga starts yelling, holding Primula hostage. She's relieved that Kenichi came for her, but Shaga's piecing things together, figuring they must come to rescue this girl. Then he clocks Kenichi's ability to control monsters and realizes this ain't an ordinary crew. Kenichi tells him to let Primula go, but Shaga's got his own plans, telling them to drop their weapons or she won't make it. They ignore him, so he rips some of her clothes and mutters about how he would have had his way with her if he knew things would end up like this. Kenichi keeps quiet, buys a laser sight real quick, then leans toward Miley, tells her to take the shot soon as he blinds Shaga with the light. Miley catches on fast. Kenichi flips on the laser, hitting Shaga straight in the eyes. Dude flinches, letting go of Primula, and Crack Miley puts a bullet in him. Primula don't waste no time. She runs straight for Kenichi, but Shaga ain't letting her go that easy. Before he can grab her again, some unknown force throws him forward, right in front of Miley. She looks down at him, cold as ice, tells him she ain't missing this time. Then she puts him down for good. Primula throws herself into Kenichi's arms, holding on tight. That drug from earlier is hitting hard. For a second his mind starts wandering into places that would change the rating of this whole scene. But whether it's pure willpower or straight-up survival instinct, he pushes it down. Playing it off like a simple hug is all he needs. Once the fight's wrapped up, one of the cat folk heads back to Anama to let her know what went down. Inside the castle, the rescued girls finally get a bath, while Kenichi puts his baco away. He tells them he got some fresh clothes, then asks Primula to help Anemone clean up too. He hands her a pair of scissors, saying she should cut Anemone's hair while she's at it. Primula picks up the scissors, then her merchant instincts kick in. She asks Kenichi to sell him to her company, dropping her towel in the process. The other girls call her out, and she turns red real quick. Once the baths are done, Anemone steps out, cleaned up and looking fresh. Kenichi introduces himself, then asks her name. They talk for a bit, and soon enough, the truth spills out. A horny noble was behind all this mess. Anemone hands a letter to the knight, and the old mage puts the pieces together. The guild and the knights were dragging their feet cause a noble was pulling the strings. Kenichi nods, giving Anemone her props for bringing the info to light. Sometime later, Anama rolls up to the castle. Relief washes over her when she sees everyone safe, but her eyes land on a small child among the rescued. She stops, stunned. Says the kid is the same age her own child would have been if they were still alive. Kenichi wasn't expecting that. She explains that she had a child once, but they didn't make it through the plague. That night everyone crashes. Kenichi lays there, staring at the ceiling, thinking they should be able to head back to Dahlia tomorrow. Earlier there was a whole grim talk about cleaning up the bodies, but right now he's way too tired to even think about it. Sleep takes him. The shot jumps to Kenichi and the crew rolling back into town. Mallow and his people are there, waiting on them. They pull up in their truck. The second Mallow spots his daughter. She's already running straight into his arms. They hug it out, relieved they made it back in one piece. Mallow catches a glimpse of his daughter's blouse, looking fancier than usual. She lets him know Kenichi gave it to her. Mallow's mind flips to business. He figures this thing's gonna sell crazy fast. Kenichi ain't surprised at this point. No matter the situation, Mallow stays locked in on profit. Mallow thanks Kenichi for saving his daughter, then asks if he's got the loot stashed in his item box. Kenichi nods, saying he got it covered. The story rewinds a little, showing how things went down earlier. The catfolk had asked Kenichi to store the bandits' heads in his item box. They told him they needed proof that the bandits were taken out. Since the bounty this time is massive, the higher-ups need to see their faces to make it official. They admit it might feel off at first, but tell him he'll get used to it. Miley mentions how the heads start stinking after a while, making it a hassle to carry them around. With Kenichi's item box, that's not a problem. Kenichi sighs, thinking he should have expected this. It's another world after all. Then he loads the heads into his item box without a fuss. On top of that, he made sure to scoop up everything the bandits had stolen. He stuffed all of it into his item box. About 100 gold coins, a bunch of rugs, pottery, gemstones, swords, and other valuable stuff. Then his mind jumps to the girls, ended up bringing them along too. Before leaving the hideout, he asked them if they wanted to go home. Some of them said they had nowhere to return to, because everyone back home was gone. So he gave them another option. Come to Dahlia with him, and they agree immediately. Kenichi made sure they knew they had a choice, asking them to decide whether they wanted to go back or move forward. He let them know Dahlia's a big city, a place where they could find work. Primula even threw in an offer. Mallow Trading Company would help them out. Kenichi turned to Anemone, asking where home was. She told him Europe Village. Primula chimed in, saying it was 800 kilometers out. Kenichi let her know he could take her there, but she shook her head. She didn't want to go back. Anama pieced it together. Her family might have sold her off to cut down on mouths to feed. Kenichi asked if she wanted to roll with them to Dahlia. She nodded, that was her choice. Later on, they kept moving toward Dahlia, dropping off the girls who wanted to go back to their villages. The trip took days, but they finally made it. Back in the present, the catfolk were at the Adventurers Guild, holding up Shaga's head for the receptionist. She froze, eyes wide with shock. Another male receptionist stepped in, asking for details, then wondered how many heads they had. The catfolk tried to give the right number, but numbers weren't their strong suit. They couldn't remember the exact count. Kenichi spoke up 52 heads. The whole guild went dead silent. Nobody saw that number coming. The catfolk figured checking them all would take the whole day. Kenichi kicked back while they worked through it. The old mage strolled up to him, eyes sharp, said Kenishi's magic was something else, and that item box of his held way more than most. Then he lowered his voice, warning that nobles would come sniffing around if they found out. Kenichi shrugged. That wouldn't happen as long as he kept his mouth shut. The old mage had no plans on talking. Kenichi kept it simple. If things got messy, he'd leave town. Paul then mentioned he was heading to see the local lord, Count Asclepius. Kenichi picked up on what that meant. Paul was about to report that nobles were tangled up in this whole mess, but he didn't deny it before leaving immediately. Kenichi later mentioned that the guild spent all the way till nightfall checking the heads. The bounty totaled up to 861 gold coins. Anama turned down any share of the reward, saying she hadn't done anything to earn it. Instead, she asked Kenichi if she could look after Anemone, promising to treat her like her own kid. Kenichi didn't see a problem with that, so he stepped out of the guild and kept moving. Out in the streets, Kenichi saw folks celebrating, hyped up over Shaga and his crew getting taken down. As he dipped out, Anemone trailed right behind him. Meanwhile, inside the guild, Anama grabbed some water for both of them. But when she looked up, Anemone was gone. With the city gates already shut, Kenichi figured he'd crash in town for the night. He made his way to Azalea's inn, where a bard was singing about their crew and how they handled Shaga. As soon as Azalea spotted him, her eyes lit up, and she wasted no time asking if it was true he took down a whole gang of bandits. Kenichi shrugged it off, saying that wasn't the case, then joked that if she thought he did, she was probably already eyeing his reward. Azalea leaned in, bringing up some promise he supposedly made about making her his if his business ever took off. Kenichi raised a brow, wondering how she even knew he had money now. He shut that down real quick, telling her he never made any promises. Then he asked if she had a room free. She nodded but put on a fake sob story, acting hurt and asking if she was just a fling. Kenichi ignored her drama, headed up to his room, and figured it wouldn't be long before the nobles started hearing his name. Later that night, Kenichi was knocked out in bed when Azalea snuck under the covers with him. He told her straight up he was too beat to deal with anything. But that didn't stop her. She slipped out of her clothes, ready to go until Anemone walked in, freezing both of them in place. By morning, Kenichi mentioned that Anemone ended up sticking around after all. He took her over to Anama's shop to hand her off, but Anama was nowhere to be found. Not wanting to waste time, he decided to handle business for the day. First stop, the weapon shop. He sold off the weapons he got from the bandits, pulling in 32 gold coins. Then he hit up Mallow Trading Company, selling bases and other valuables for 35 gold. After that, he dropped off furniture at the old mage's shop, making another 22 gold off the deal. At the end of it all, the total came up to 89 gold coins. They split it 7 ways, leaving everyone with 12 each. Kenichi handed over the dresses to Anama and the other women who stayed behind, then made his way home. When they got there, Anama was already waiting, relieved to see Anemone safe and sound. Inside, Anama found out that Anemone wanted to stick around with Kenichi. She offered to take her along and teach her how to run a business, but Anemone wasn't having it. Kenichi asked if she was sure, and she didn't hesitate. Anama respected her decision but told her she could always come back if things got rough. After that, Kenichi walked Anama to a carriage heading back to town, then returned home and got straight to the point, asking Anemone why she wanted to stay. She answered without thinking twice it was because he fed her until she was full. That night, they had dinner together. Then Anemone insisted on taking a bath together. After that, she wanted them to sleep together too, so they did. Meanwhile outside, some shady-looking men lurked around, keeping tabs on Kenichi. He had no idea. All he knew was that he had a messed up dream that left him waking up in a cold sweat. 2 weeks rolled by, and Paul got promoted to Baron for taking down Shaga. They gave him a small territory to run, and he was already looking for settlers, and a wife too. At the same time, word spread that some noble had been stripped of their rank. Kenichi figured it made sense after all. They were the ones who hired bandits to snatch Primula. Then, as they were out, they spotted a bicycle rolling by. Anemone called it a dray sign. Kenichi couldn't help but remember how Mallow and Primula had laughed at his idea at first, but they had sharp noses for business. Once the dust settled after the whole Shaga ordeal, they called him up, handed him 5 gold coins, and apologized for clowning his idea before buying the rights to the dray sign. Even with all that, Kenichi couldn't shake the feeling that someone was tailing him. He kept looking around, but nothing seemed off. Still, he knew somebody was out there watching. Meanwhile, the guild finally got their paperwork sorted and started handing out rewards. Kenichi took his cut, paid back what he had borrowed from Mallow for his plans, and gave the rest to the women he rescued. Kenichi got that feeling again someone was watching him. This time, he locked onto the guy. Without a second thought, he grabbed Anemone's hand and bounced. But he wasn't alone. A whole crew was hot on his trail. Ducking into the alleys, he knocked over a few boxes to slow them down. But before he could fully shake them, a carriage cut him off, trapping him. They told him to get in quietly, said their boss wanted a word. He played along for now, but as soon as he got inside, he pulled out some firecrackers on the spot and lobbed them into the carriage and at the ones chasing him. The sudden blasts gave him the perfect opening. Slipping out from under the carriage, he made a break for it. Even as they kept coming, he snatched up a crossbow, raising it just enough to make them think twice about pushing their luck. Right then Mallow rolled up, catching the tail end of the chaos. He pulled up alongside them, asking what was going on. Kenichi and Anemone wasted no time jumping into his carriage, filling him in on the mess. Mallow didn't need much to put the pieces together. He figured it had to be the anti-monarchy crew. He told Kenichi to go see the local lord, said the guy might be able to help since he wasn't a bad dude. Kenichi saw his point, but he also knew the lord wouldn't do anything for free. Taxes were coming, no way around it. Kenichi got off at the edge of town. Meanwhile, back at Mallow's place, Mallow told his daughter he'd run into Kenichi earlier. That's when she remembered they hadn't properly thanked him yet. Because of him, their family had earned a name. The lord had been so impressed with the Dre sign they invented that he let them take on a family name straight from it. Now she goes by Primula ni Dre sign. Mallow leaned back, telling her the whole company owed a debt to Kenichi. One way or another, they had to pay him back. The next day, as Primula got ready, she thought about how she used to see Kenichi as just some guy running a small stall. But after working with him, she realized he was sharp, easygoing, and everything he had was solid. Doing business with him brought big profits, and she couldn't ignore that. That was why she kept trying to get his attention, even if it never really worked. But when he showed up to save her, she knew he cared. That was enough. She had made up her mind. She was going to be with him. Yet when she reached his place, everything was gone. The house, the fields, nothing was left. Meanwhile, Kenichi was out of town, riding his off-road bike when he ran into Fayu. They pulled over to talk, and before long, Fayu found out Kenichi had become a merchant. That set off a bunch of questions. He even asked if Kenichi's bike was the famous Dre sign. Kenichi smirked, telling him it was a custom model built just for him. Then Fayu asked where he was headed. Kenichi thought back to packing everything in his item box and leaving his old place behind. He didn't know if there was some deeper meaning to it. But after saving Primula, he figured things had worked out the way they were supposed to. Just as he was about to leave, a bobcat appeared. Kenichi gave it a nod, wishing it a good life. But the little thing wasn't going anywhere. It followed him, making it clear it wanted to stay. Bringing himself back to the moment, Kenichi finally answered Fayu's question. He had no set destination, just moving forward. Fayu glanced at the two people with him and asked who they were. Kenichi looked over and said, "They're my family." Then he rode off, leaving Fayu watching as he disappeared down the road, wishing him safe travels. The scene shifts to Kenichi fishing by a river. As he cooks the fish he caught, he explains that they're out searching for a new place to call home. Right now, they're about 100 kilometers from Dahlia, with another 5 to 6 kilometers left before they reach a town called Astrankia. He serves up some fish soup to Anemone and the bobcat, thinking to himself that this kind of life is the true meaning of taking it slow. He mentions that earlier, Anemone told him she's 12, but he's not too sure about that. She seems a little too small for her age. Later, we see him flying a drone, and Anemone gets all excited, thinking it's some kind of magic. He plays along, telling her that it is, while in his head, he figures he really needs to find a place to settle down. Then, he notices that the river he's camping by leads to a lake. That gives him an idea. Head to the lake and see if there's a good spot to set up camp. Hopping on his bike with his companions, they ride out to the lake, where they find a solid place to make their base. Kenichi then puts on a little show, pretending to chant a spell to summon his house, making Anemone believe he's casting real magic, when in reality, his house appears as planned. After getting everything set up, we see him trying to come up with a name for the bobcat. He tosses around a few ideas before finally settling on Vel, short for velvet. Later, we see him teaching Anemone how to read and write, and she's already getting the hang of it. The next, he moves on to math, but like most kids, she's not a fan. As she struggles through some math problems, Kenichi starts thinking about finding an alternative fuel source. Kerosene is too damn pricey, and he remembers seeing something about biodiesel made from used cooking oil. Deciding to give it a shot, he picks up some books to dig into the topic. We see him flipping through the books when Anemone asks what he's up to. He tells her he's reading, and she wants to do the same. But when he explains that the books are in a language she's not familiar with, she insists she still wants to learn it, ready to take on the challenge. Kenichi starts teaching Anemone Japanese, and the next day, we see him setting up a camouflage around his solar panels. As he's working, he hears rustling in the bushes. Thinking it might be a monster, he gets ready for a fight until Miley suddenly pounces on him like a damn beast. She's thrilled to have finally tracked him down and tells him off for ditching her like that. She explains that she had to work hard to follow his scent all the way here, then finally meets Anemone. Anemone is overjoyed to see her, and Kenichi lets her know that Miley's staying with them from now on. Later, we see them sitting down for lunch. Kenichi asks if Dahlia's been the same since he left. Miley recalls that while she was in town, Norspel proposed to Primula. Kenichi figures it's good she's marrying someone her age. He's a little bummed about missing the ceremony, and after lunch, they all take a bath. Once they dry off, they settle in to read some picture books. Miley mentions that even she can understand these books thanks to the pictures, and Kenichi starts thinking this could be a great product. He's not sure about making books based on fairy tales from his own world, so he asks the girls if there are any local stories. They list off a few, and one called The Forest Elf catches Kenichi's interest. Anemone explains that it's about an elf living deep in the forest who falls for a human prince. Their love is forbidden, and both elves and humans oppose their union. The elf is nearly killed for it, but with the help of fairies, the two manage to escape and live happily ever after in the land of the fairies. We then see Kenichi finishing up a picture book based on the story. Using a printing machine kit, he prints out copies, blowing the girls' minds. After that, he binds the books with another machine and hands each girl a copy, making them both happy. Just then, a boat approaches their house. Kenichi immediately gets on guard and tells Miley to take Anemone somewhere safe in case things go south. She nods and leads Anemone away, while Kenichi steps forward, crossbow in hand, to meet the unexpected guests. They quickly tell him to lower his weapon, revealing themselves as residents from Santanka, a village across the lake. Kenichi, still wary, asks what they want with him, wondering if he's unknowingly broken some law by settling here. They assure him that there are no laws against it. They were just making sure some bullshit bandits hadn't set up camp in the area. Kenichi tells them he's just a merchant, but they eye his weapons, thinking he's a little too well armed for that. He explains that he had to flee his last city because of some trouble, so he prefers to stay prepared for anything. Right then, the bobcat strolls over and starts fawning over him. Seeing this, the beastman figures there's no way Kenichi could be a bad guy. The man in the boat then introduces himself as Crouton, while the beastman says his name is Nyanyas. Kenichi introduces himself as well, and Crouton reveals that he used to work for the government in Estrankia. Nyanyas takes a look around Kenichi's home, checking everything out before stating that there's nothing suspicious going on here. Crouton apologizes for doubting him. He then notices the picture books Kenichi made and decides to buy one for his daughter. After they leave, Kenichi sits down for lunch with his companions. Later, we see him out in the forest collecting herbs when Miley shows up in a playful mood. She pounces on him, teasing that since Anemone isn't around, they should do it. Kenichi hesitates, unsure, but she drags him into it, and they end up doing the deed. Sometime later, Kenichi bursts out of his shed and dives straight into the river. He cools off, thinking about how hot it got in there, revealing that he was working on making diesel. He explains that the process involved a dangerous toxin, but in the end, he managed to create it. Once he's done, he realizes Anemone is pissed as hell. He had been completely wrapped up in making diesel for days and hadn't given her any damn attention. Trying to make it up to her, he asks if they should work on a new picture book. She stays silent, still sulking, and he suggests that they head to Estrankia. Right then, Miley decides she wants to tag along too, and Anemone finally agrees to go with them. We then see them setting out for the city, following Miley since she's been there a few times before. As they get closer, Kenichi decides to walk the rest of the way on foot because his first stop is the damn Adventurers Guild. Kenichi steps up to the receptionist and tells her he wants to register with this branch of the Adventurers Guild. Both he and Miley hand over their current guild IDs. The receptionist steps inside with them for a minute, then comes out all flustered, asking if Kenichi is the guy who beat Shaga in Dahlia. He tells her not to spill his personal details, but she doesn't really get his lingo, so he just tells her to keep quiet about it. Meanwhile, Kenichi's eyes are glued to a summer watermelon, craving a bite. The receptionist agrees to keep quiet and informs him that registration's done, she charges 1 silver each. Outside, while they're grabbing a bite, Kenichi spots some shady dudes looking around. and he sees Crouton slipping into a narrow alley with his daughter. Kenichi decides not to get involved and instead continues exploring the town. As they wander, they stumble upon a shop called Snowflake Tool Shop. Miley mentions that the shop's run by an old lady mage, so Kenichi decides to pop in. Inside, he finds something odd and gets curious about what it's for. The old mage, who doesn't like being called old, shows him its use. She adds some water and wine into the contraption, and they both come out separately. Kenichi figures the gadget must be used to separate certain substances from a mix, and he thinks it's awesome. He's convinced he can use it to make biodiesel without any harsh chemicals, so he asks her how much it costs. She says it's 5 gold coins, and he buys it on the spot. Then Anemone brings in a grimoire, telling the old lady she wants to purchase it. Kenichi gets all hyped up at the sight of a grimoire. He asks if anyone can use magic just by reading a grimoire, and the old mage explains that they can, but only if they have magical power. Curious, Kenichi decides to check it out for himself and asks for the price. It sets him back 10 gold coins, and he goes ahead and buys it. But the old lady gives him a heads up he ain't walking out with it just yet. She's gotta log every grimoire she sells. Tells him to swing by in a week to pick it up. After that, we see them heading back when they run into Nyanya's. He's in a hurry and bails quickly, so Kenichi figures they should get home too before things get messy. Right then, a sharp scream cuts through the street. He whips his head around and spots Crouton and his little girl backed into a corner, the same shady guys from before closing in on them. Kenichi tries to ignore it, but when Anemone innocently asks if he's not gonna help them, he can't say no. He tells Miley to keep an eye on Anemone, grabs a mask to hide his identity, and steps in to confront the thugs. They ask what he wants, and he warns them to back off from this parent-child duo, or they'll have to answer to his magic dam straight. Of course, like any thug crew, they don't pay him any mind until he scares them off with some firecrackers, threatening to blow them up from the inside. That sends them running. Crouton and his daughter are initially freaked out, but once Kenichi shows them who he really is, they calm down. Just then, Nyanya shows up, relieved to see Crouton and his daughter safe. Later, Crouton thanks Kenichi for saving them, and Kenichi asks who those guys were. Crouton explains they were grunts from Zutara, the Spice Syndicate. He adds that he arrested them a bunch of times back when he worked for the government, and they've been after him ever since. Crouton's little girl looks up curious and asks if these folks are his friends. He's shaking his head, then lets her in on it. They're the ones who sold him that picture book. She gets super excited about that, thanking Kenichi for the book, while Anemone proudly tells her she helped him make it. Hearing all this, Mary pipes up, saying she wants to make a book too. Anemone is also down to collaborate, and the two kids hit it off, making Kenichi happy that Anemone's made a friend her own age. Later on, Crouton's family visits Kenichi and Anemone, and they spend the whole day doing fun stuff together. That evening, they all head off, and from then on, Anemone and Mary start visiting each other's houses and playing every day. But then, things take a sudden turn. Out of nowhere, Crouton comes barreling up to Kenichi's place, clutching every coin he's ever saved. Desperation's all over his face. He pleads with him to sell some medicine his little girl's burning up bad. He breaks it down it's some local sickness, the kind that don't give folks much time. Most who catch it don't even make it till morning. Miley pipes up, telling Crouton to go see the old lady mage. She's got magic that can fix folks up. But Crouton shakes his head, eyes filled with worry. That kind of help don't come cheap, and he ain't got the coin for it. Kenichi steps in and hands him some cold medicine for kids, telling him to give it to Mary and leaving the rest of the problem to him. Crouton leaves in a hurry, and Kenichi hops on his bike and rides off. Later, we see the old lady mage checking on Mary. She explains that what Mary's got is called chicory fever. Her healing magic doesn't work on it, though the only cure is the seeds from chicory blooms, which grow near the spring at the source of the river. Without a second thought, Kenichi decides he's got to go grab those seeds right away. Crouton offers to tag along, and even Nyanya's decides to join in. Kenichi warns Crouton that it's going to be dangerous, but Crouton promises he won't slow him down. The three of them get set to go, but the old lady mage calls out she needs those seeds first thing in the morning. They all nod in agreement and set off on their quest. Meanwhile, the thugs from earlier are watching from the shadows. Grinning at the sight of Crouton's place, they're thinking things are about to get real interesting. Kenichi and his crew reach the river's source, and Nyanya senses something coming their way. They stay on guard, but it turns out to be Vel. With that settled, Kenichi buys a boat to move around easier and gets a chicory flower seed. Crouton thanks him, saying this will help him save his daughter. Before they can relax, Nyanya's and Vel notice something approaching. Kanishi spots them black wolves. He knows it's time for a grudge match. He summons 2 swords, hands one to Crouton, and keeps the other. He tells them he'll hold the wolves back while they get to Mary. Nyanya's hesitates, but Kanishi makes it clear if they don't hurry, Mary's in real danger. He throws fireworks at the wolves and rushes at them while Nyanya's and Crouton take off. But the wolves don't stay on him. They switch targets and chase after them instead. Meanwhile, the goons from earlier are watching, and it's obvious someone with them is controlling the wolves. Before they can act, the bobcat finds them and forces them out of hiding. Kanishi notices the flute the dogman just dropped and immediately understands he's the one commanding the wolves. He shouts for Nyanya's and Crouton to go, and they don't waste time. The dogman grabs his flute, trying to send the wolves after them. But Kanishi knows they won't outrun a catman. Then something changes. The wolves stop listening. They sense something else. A massive shadowy beast appears and takes the dogman out first. The goons panic and run, but Kanishi stays watching. The beast moves toward him, and he fires his crossbow. The bobcat leaps at it, keeping it busy. Kanishi sees an opening and fires 10 times the usual amount of firecrackers, but the beast catches them in its mouth, explode inside, weakening it. Kanishi doesn't hesitate, summons his backhoe and takes the beast down from behind. When the dust settles, he sees the dogman unconscious on the ground. The next scene cuts to him returning to Crouton's house. He asks how Mary is, and Crouton tells him the worst is over. He and his wife thank Kanishi for saving their daughter. Kanishi never saw himself as the type to go around saving people, but he had to admit it was a nice change of pace. Later, he pulls Crouton aside outside the house and tells him something he hadn't mentioned before he saved the dogman. Instead of finishing him off, he made him swear never to harm Crouton or his family. The dogman agreed, but made it clear he wasn't responsible for anyone else who might hold a grudge. Kanishi tells him straight it'd be best if he left the city. Moving his family would mean he wouldn't have to keep looking over his shoulder. But Crouton shakes his head. He's got nowhere else to go. Dahlia isn't an option either, since Zuder is tied to Bacopa. That's when Kanishi brings up a lead Norspel's domain, which was recently formed. He offers to write a letter of recommendation since he and the Baron are friends. Crouton thinks it sounds like a great opportunity, but he asks for time to think it over. Kanishi gets it. Leaving behind everything you know takes a different kind of strength. The next day, when Kanishi gets back home, Miley is pissed. She's mad he left her out of what sounded like a great adventure. He tells her he didn't have time to bring her, plus someone needed to look after Anemone. Miley gets it, but she's not happy about it. Anemone, on the other hand, simply thanks him for saving Mary. A few days later, Crouton and Nyanya's leave the city, heading for Norspel's barony. His wife and daughters stay behind, since Mary's still recovering, but they plan to follow once she's strong enough. Not long after, Miley picks up a familiar scent. There's a dogman nearby. It's the same one from before. He stands outside, casually mentioning that it's good Crouton's gone. He reminds them that others had grudges against him, but they don't need to worry anymore. It's clear what he means, he's handled them himself. Miley doesn't trust anything coming from a dogman, and he doesn't argue. As he turns to leave, he simply says dogman loyalty is something that should be studied in books. Kanishi watches him go and asks where he's heading. Without looking back, he says he can't stay in this city anymore. Then he fades into the darkness. Kanishi heads to the guild to have the beast from earlier butchered, and the moment the butcher sees what he's brought, his eyes go wide. A tusked bear. He can't believe Kanishi managed to take down something that size. Kanishi shrugs it off, calling it luck, then tells him to carve out the meat and magic stone while he sells off the rest. The butcher gets to work but warns him it'll take until evening to finish. With time to kill, Kanishi decides to head home for a bit. On his way back, he walks past a certain hotel and suddenly feels a chill, as if someone's talking about him. Inside, a familiar face is searching for someone. Later at home, Kanishi gets to work on something else using that magical contraption he bought earlier. He makes biodiesel effortlessly. The results are better than expected. His production cost just dropped by 10 times. To test it out, he pours the new fuel into his generator. By evening, it's running smoothly. Satisfied, he heads back into the city, letting Miley and Anemone know he might spend the night there if it gets too late. He goes straight to the old lady's shop, where she hands over the grimoire, telling him the registration is complete. Kanishi notices a stone embedded in the cover, and she explains it's a magic stone. The spell recorded in this book is directly linked to it. Without the stone, the spell won't activate. Kanishi takes it all in, hoping this purchase turns out to be as useful as the magic tool he bought before. The scene shifts to him picking up the tusk bear's meat and magic stone. and the butcher tells him he can collect his payment for the rest at the counter. Kenichi does just that. While the girl counts his money, his eyes stay locked on her chest. No shame at all, making her look straight up bothered. After collecting his payment, he heads home. As he walks, another chill runs down his spine, making him think he should hurry before he catches a cold. But just then someone grabs his sleeve. A voice speaks up. "It's a woman, I finally found you." Kenichi turns and sees Primula. Caught off guard, he asks what she's doing here, but before he gets an answer, she pulls him into a hug, calling him cruel for disappearing like that. Kenichi sighs, saying that if he had been caught by the nobles, it would have caused problems for her company. But Primula dismisses that, telling him it wasn't his call to decide whether that was a problem or not. Kenichi notices people starting to stare. With a sigh, he tells her they should talk somewhere more private. Primula invites Kenichi to her hotel, and the scene shifts to them talking in the restaurant. She tells him that the dressine he introduced them to ended up giving her family their name, and brings up everything else he's done for them. But Kenichi doesn't see it that way. In his mind, he didn't do much, they were the ones who helped him. She reminds him that he even saved her from bandits, but he brushes it off and changes the subject, mentioning that he heard she was about to marry Norse Paul. Primula laughs, saying there had been talk about it for a while, but she turned him down. Kenichi thinks it would have been a strong union, but before he can say more, she brings up something else. Both Anama and the old mage were mad at him for leaving without a word. Kenichi admits he felt guilty about it, but he didn't want to cause trouble. She insists he wasn't making things difficult for anyone. He understands her point, but tells her she should go home now that she knows he's fine. She refuses, saying if he's not going back, then neither is she. Kenichi sighs, realizing she's not going to change her mind. Curious, he asks how she even managed to track him down. She explains that she had been checking with the guild to see if he registered anywhere new. Then one day, she found out he had signed up at the city's guild. The moment she learned that, she jumped in a carriage and came straight here. Kenichi is stunned. They end up in a heated argument, and that's how the night ends. The next morning, Kenichi returns home. Miley and Anemone are both surprised to see him with a woman, and they immediately recognize her as Mallow's daughter. Primula is furious. He left her behind but brought Anemone and Miley with him. Kenichi defends himself, saying Miley wasn't invited, she just tracked his scent, and he couldn't leave Anemone alone since she's just a kid. Anemone isn't happy about Kenichi and Primula getting closer, and it doesn't take long before she and Miley start competing for his attention. At one point, Anemone bluntly asks Kenichi if Primula is staying with them now. She's convinced their place is already cramped, and before he can answer, she's already treating Primula like a rival. Kenichi tells them to get along, but Anemone mutters that she hopes he won't bring any more people in. He hesitates, then reluctantly agrees. That's when Primula notices Vel and is shocked to see her here too. She can't believe Kenichi brought a bobcat with him, but not her. Kenichi explains that Vel followed him on her own, just like Miley. Later that night, the chaos continues. Everyone is arguing about who gets to sleep next to Kenichi. He ignores the mess, deciding to take a bath instead. Since the house has more people now, Kenichi had bought an extra bath. He relaxes in one tub, while Miley and Anemone use the other. But Anemone isn't satisfied. She wants to get in with Kenichi. He falters, but there's no stopping her, and she climbs in. Before long, Primula shows up too, but she hesitates, feeling shy about bathing with everyone. Kenichi tells her she can take one alone later, but she doesn't want to bathe by herself at night. In the end, she joins Miley in the other tub. Later, Kenichi attempts to cast the fireball spell from the grimoire he got, but nothing happens. Frustrated, he realizes he has no power. Just as he's processing the disappointment, Anemone casually picks up the grimoire, reads the spell, and tries casting it for fun. To everyone's shock, a fireball suddenly appears in the middle of the house, leaving them all speechless. Thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, it makes all the difference. Kenichi grabs some fire extinguishers, and he and the girls put out the fire. Anemone apologizes, but Kenichi isn't mad at all. He's hyped because she can use magic. Then she passes out, so they take her to bed, and by morning her fever's gone. When she wakes up, Kenichi gives her some canned peaches. She's into them, and the other two girls are curious too. Once they try them, they're hooked, thinking this must be some high-class fruit only nobles eat. A few days later, Anemone's fully recovered, and Kenichi invites Mary and her family over since Mary's feeling better too. They fire up a barbecue and grill some tusk bear meat, but Mary's not feeling it. It's tough, hard to chew, and just not good. Kenichi agrees, so he tenderizes it, seasons it up with soy sauce and spices, and grills it again. This time it's way better, and they all dig in. Then Kenichi makes a stew out of the bear meat, and it's a hit. Everyone's impressed by how good it tastes. Later, Anemone and Mary finish the picture book they've been working on. Primula thinks it's amazing and figures it could sell well. That sparks an idea. She wants to start a business in Astrankia. Kenichi watches her, thinking he might have just ignited her business instincts. He asks what else she plans to sell besides the book. She's got it all figured out: bear stew and stewed rinkus. Mary's mom backs her up, saying she's never had anything this good, even in Astrankia. Everyone else agrees. She also points out that selling all this won't be easy alone, so she offers to help as a way of repaying Kenichi for everything he's done. Primula's all smiles at being called Kenishi's wife. Turns out, Mary's mom has experience as a waitress, so she'd be a big help. Kenishi's on board, and Mary decides she'll pitch in too. When she asks Anemone what she's planning, Anemone's got no doubts she's sticking with Kenichi. The next day, Kenichi takes Primula to town and buys her a utility cart so she can start selling. Before long, she and the girls are out there pushing the stew, and it catches on fast. People start lining up, calling it noble-worthy food. Then some rough-looking guys show up, trying to stir up trouble. They pull a stunt, making a scene about a bug in the stew, trying to trash their reputation. The scene shifts, and Kenishi's up by the cliff near his place, flying his drone to check things out from above. He spots a plateau packed with untouched resources, and that gets him thinking. Anemone, using her binoculars, catches some sparkly stones on the cliffside, and Kenichi takes a closer look, realizing he's never seen ore like that before. Something about it tells him it's worth a lot of money. Now he's wondering how to mine it, but before he figures that out, he notices it's getting late. Time to head back to town and pick up Primula. When he gets there, she's with the others, and she tells him they sold out. That catches him off guard, but then he figures it makes sense, his food's good, and she's got a sharp business sense. Then he notices a beast woman with her and asks who she is. Primula explains that this woman stepped in when some guys were stirring up trouble at the stall. Turns out, she called them out for slipping a bug into the stew, and when they denied it, she told them to check their pockets. She was sure they still had bugs left, and once they realized she had them cornered, they took off knowing they couldn't argue their way out. Primula decided to hire her as a bodyguard, and Kenichi thanks her for looking out. The beast woman shrugs it off, saying it worked out for her too. Primula's paying her a small silver just to glare at people who cause trouble, and to her, that's easy money. She introduces herself as Naima. Kenichi does the same, and later that night, they all head back to his place. When they get there, Miley and Anemone welcome him home, but their eyes widen when they see he's brought another woman. He quickly explains she's Primula's bodyguard. Miley relaxes, relieved she's not another one of his women, and Kenichi adds that Primula just wanted to treat her to dinner. The bobcat welcomes him back, and Naimna, looking around, is surprised to see a bobcat in the house. Later on, Naimna's at the table having dinner, and she's loving it, but she wishes she had some wine to go with it. Kenichi hands her a bottle, and she takes a sip thinking it's great, but then he tells her it's the cheapest wine he could find. Doesn't matter to her, food's good, wine's good, and she's already thinking this place feels like heaven. Then Kenichi casually asks if she wants a bath. Naimna's eyes widen when Kenichi asks if she wants a bath. She didn't expect them to have one of those too. Anemone steps up saying she'll heat it, and with a flick of her hand, fire magic flares up, warming the water fast. Kenichi watches her, a little worried about how often she's been using her magic. But Primula tells him it's fine, more magic they use, stronger they get. The next thing, everyone's soaking in the tub, steam rising around them. Once they're done, they dry off, and later, Naimna flops onto a bed, feeling how soft it is. She's loving it here, talking about how she could stay forever. Miley shuts that down quick, saying they barely have space as it is. Kenichi moves on to teaching Anemone, and Naimna's surprised she studies. He tells her knowing how to read, write, and do numbers is important, opens up more job options. Then he mentions something he's heard, that women in this world don't have many choices. Naima sighs, confirming it. Most have to sell themselves just to survive. Kenichi, thinking ahead, suggests Anemone learn business from Primula, but Anemone shakes her head. She's got her own plans, learning more magic, fighting dragons with Kenichi someday. He just sighs, adventuring like that ain't his thing. He's aiming for an easygoing life. Meanwhile, Primula's stall keeps pulling in business every day, and Kenichi finally builds a scaffolding to get up the cliff. By the time he's done, it's already dark. Primula shows up after work, taking a look at the structure. She smirks, saying he must have piles of junk like this stashed in his item box. Kenichi admits he does, but he can't exactly show her everything inside. She raises an eyebrow, waiting for an answer, and he just shrugs. Everybody's got their secrets. He's sure she's got one or two of her own. She eyes him still suspicious, but before she can dig further, he pulls her in and kisses her. Then he tells her if she wants to leave, now's the time, but she doesn't. The next morning, Kanisha's out by the scaffolding, cutting down some grass, while Primula takes the day off to see what's on the other side. They all climb up, and Kanisha's also invited Mary and her mother. Once they're up there, they split up searching for different things, and Kanishi gets to work drilling out ores from the cliff walls. He mines one, tosses it in his item box, and checks its name. Rhodonite one piece goes for over 200,000 yen. That's big money. He keeps going, and by the time he's done, he's pulled out enough to hit 1,000,000 yen. Later, he's back home making gyoza for dinner, and the girls jump in to help. When it's ready, they all dig in, and turns out it's real good. They can't believe he made something this tasty using bear meat. Primula's loving the yellow sauce too. Kanishi tells her it's called mayonnaise. Naimna's heard about it apparently, it's been getting popular in the empire. Says a mage came up with it using magic. Kanishi puts 2 and 2 together. That's gotta be the same guy behind double entry bookkeeping and the pitcher pump. He wonders if that guy's eating gyoza too. Primula asks if Kanishi made the mayo using magic, but he tells her it's nothing like that. Vinegar, eggs, and oil, that's all it takes. She's surprised, says he's gotta teach her how to make it. He tells her he will later. For now, they focus on the food. Primula's already thinking she could sell this at her stall, but Kanishi points out it takes a lot of work to make. She's got a quick answer: hire more staff. He can't help but think she's turning into a real merchant. Before they call it a night, he decides to whip up one more dish. When he's done, there's a steak on the table, and Naimna's all over it. She takes one bite, sniffs the air, picking up something distinct. Kanishi tells her it's wine. Now she wants a drink. He sighs knowing there's no stopping her, and hands it over, warning her it's strong. Didn't take long before she's completely drunk, clinging onto Kanishi. Miley's not having any of it. She drags Naimna away, but Naimna laughs it off, saying she ain't trying to steal him. Then she looks at Kanishi, asking if she can stay with them. Miley shuts that down instantly, telling her to leave. Kanishi steps in, telling Miley to chill since Primula still needs her as a bodyguard. Miley don't trust her, but Primula does. She lets Naimna stay, knowing she's only here for the food, not Kanishi. Later, Naimna sets up her room in the shed and asks Kanishi if she gotta pay rent. He tells her she don't. She smirks, asking if he's trying to tame her. Kanishi shakes his head, saying that ain't the case, just wants her to keep helping Primula. As he turns to leave, she leans back, teasing him, asking if he ain't gonna do anything to her now that they're alone. Before he can even react, Miley walks in. Now both of them are standing there, telling Kanishi he can do whatever he wants with them. He just stands there wondering what the hell to do. A month rolls by, and Primula's stall keeps growing. Now it's got a name: Corolla. She's hired more staff, one of them being Iris, who's training to be the chef for a second branch she's planning to open. Time moves on, and Kanisha's been busy too, mining rhodonite worth 15 million yen. Anemone's been gathering herbs from the plateau, while Miley and Naimna turned the place into their hunting ground. Corolla's expanded even more, renting out a warehouse in the city, using it to prep their products. Profits are rolling in hard, bringing in 150 to 200,000 yen a day. The estimated yearly profit now sits over 70 million. They got enough people hired to open up 2 new branches, and Iris is training up the new chefs. Kanishi watches it all, thinking this is what a top-class merchant looks like. Primula's on a whole different level. That night, Primula thanks Kanishi, telling him she owes all this success to his food. Kanishi leans back, thinking the knowledge from his old world ain't something to be played with. He hopes things stay like this, but deep down, he knows that ain't happening. Somewhere else, the queen is speaking with Princess Lilith. The bandits near Dahlia got wiped out. Reports say a mage did it, one who can summon iron beasts. Lilith knows that's a heavy hit to the royalist faction. She starts thinking about who could have summoned those beasts. The queen tells her the mage has taken up residence in Astrankia. Lilith smirks, calling it an interesting twist of fate. The queen nods, saying the spirits must have led him there. Something's brewing, and it's about to go down. The following morning, Primula acquaints herself with Kenon, the wife of Mr. Eupatorium, and they converse about her father's enterprise and their trading operations. At the same time, Kanishi stops by an elderly sorceress to acquire a book on explosive magic, and she also gifts Anemone a volume on household magic. Later that evening, while spending time with friends, Primula informs Kanishi that Lady Kenon is in search of a refined brooch after a noblewoman touring Dahlia City became upset over the brooches offered by Mallow's firm. Kanishi then offers Primula a sculpted stone bearing a female figure. When she examines it, she notices a resemblance to Lady Kenon. so he instructs her to deliver it to Kenon as a unique creation. The following morning, Miley reveals to Kenichi details about some concealed dungeons in the vicinity, which she had kept secret from Naima. Anemone expresses her wish to join them, and Kenichi agrees. The group embarks on their journey, and they marvel at the dungeon's splendor while Kenichi captures its beauty on camera. They also uncover several crystals, which he gathers using a rocket device in hopes of making a fortune. Suddenly, they encounter an enormous spider, and they prepare for combat. Kenichi fires his crossbow, yet it proves ineffective. Miley takes aim with her bow, targeting the spider's eyes, which weakens it. Kenichi advises Anemone to employ her magic, aiming at the creature's eyes, although she hesitates. Then the spider launches an assault, forcing them to retreat. Once safe, Anemone apologizes to Kenichi for her inability to use magic, and he reassures her that she is still too inexperienced for perilous exploits. Later that evening, while everyone unwinds in hot water, Naimuna grows furious for being left uninformed. Kenichi announces his plan to go back for more crystals, and Naimuna insists on tagging along since Primula has a few days off work. Kenichi agrees. Later, in a calmer moment, he informs Anemone that he has finished transcribing the spellbook. As she excitedly opens it to start reading, he stops her, advising her to focus on her training first. After sunrise, the group practices combat and returns to the dungeon, where Kenichi resumes collecting crystals. As the giant spider reappears, they put their strategy into action, with the girls hurling poison to prevent the creature from weaving its webs and Anemone seizing the opportunity to launch a fireball that burns it completely. They defeat the spider and continue exploring. However, as they advance, the spider reemerges, sparking another battle, only for a second spider to suddenly appear, this time a female. Kenichi observes that the larger female remains in her nest, while the male once hunted for food, and with the male gone, the female will eventually perish from lack of sustenance. They decide to withdraw, yet the spider blocks the exit. The girls throw poison at it, and Anemone tries casting spells, but nothing seems to work as the spider relentlessly attacks without backing down. Kenichi quickly comes up with a new plan. He gets a bulldozer and, with Anemone by his side, charges straight at the spider. He swings the shovel at the creature, but it latches onto the blade and starts climbing up. Acting fast, Anemone uses her magic to knock it off, giving Kenichi the chance to land a final, crushing blow with the bulldozer's shovel, finishing it off. With the way finally open, Kenichi collects more crystals before they exit the dungeon. Once they return home, Primula lets out a terrified scream at the sight of the spider, sending everyone rushing inside. There, Kenichi reveals that he brought back a spider egg, explaining that it has great nutritional value when cooked. It boosts strength and provides essential vitamins. The girls hesitate at first, but after tasting it, they're surprised by how good it is. Primula excitedly exclaims that the taste is just like cheese and explains that while cheese exists in the kingdom of Kaden, it's only made in certain regions, making it incredibly expensive. This sparks an idea: she could start making and selling cheese to earn money. Kenichi tells her that the process is actually easy, needing only milk and apple cider vinegar. He then prepares a batch for them to taste, and everyone agrees that it is exceptionally delicious. Primula expresses her wish to teach Lady Kenon the art of cheese making. However, Kenichi declines, stating that he prefers not to deal with nobles. Soon, he detects an underlying reason for her insistence. When he inquires about it, she reveals that a few days earlier, the corrupt merchant Thogalum began harassing her at her shopping stall, and although Naimuna advised her to inform Kenichi, she requested that he not be told. Kenichi promptly vows to protect Primula from the unscrupulous merchant, yet she remains determined to defeat him through savvy business tactics and asks Kenichi to leave the matter to her. He ultimately agrees that Primula can teach Lady Kenon how to make cheese. Following that morning, with Lady Kenon's assistance, dumb Thogalum receives a letter warning him to steer clear of Primula's shop. Later, Primula and the girls are seen happily managing their restaurant and celebrating their success. One day, Queen Kenon arrives at Kenichi's home, and he greets her with respect as she expresses admiration for his adventures and his dedication to helping those in need. Curious, Kenichi asks about the reason for her visit, but before she can respond, her expression shifts, and she suddenly wavers, her body growing weak as dizziness overtakes her. But all this was just an act because she wanted Kenichi to have a taste of some fresh juicy watermelon, if you catch my drift. Basically, her husband, Mr. Eupatorium, was tasked with building a canal through the kingdom, but he's running behind schedule. If the project isn't finished soon, his funding will be cut, and they might even lose their land. The remaining stretch of the canal is 15 kilometers long, and it needs to be done within a month, so she begs Kenichi to lend a hand. She's even willing to offer him any reward. He wants even her airbags to keep him comfortable. But Kenichi tells her that's not his style. Curvaceous bombshell Kanon is disappointed by his refusal, but isn't ready to give up. She offers him a special grimoire called High Protection as his reward. Kenichi isn't exactly sure what High Protection does, but Naimna says she's heard it's an insanely powerful spell that lets someone block even a dragon attack. That piques Kenishi's interest since it could be just what he needs to protect Anemone. He agrees to help Lady Kanon, but before any construction can start he needs some cash. So he asks her to hand over any unused furniture she has so he can appraise it and convert it into funds. By the time he's finished, Kenichi earns around 120 million yen, more than enough to cover the cost of his heavy machinery. With everything set, everyone piles into his car for a ride to the construction site. Along the way, Lady Kanon teases him, asking if he really doesn't want her body as part of the deal. Kenichi shuts that down firmly, saying he's good. Meanwhile, Scar is left weeping, wishing he'd gotten that offer instead. When they finally arrive at the site, Kenichi runs into Miley's brothers. It's nice to see them again, though he's curious why they're working construction. They had received a huge payout for taking down Shaga, so they should have been set for life. But one thing led to another, and one wild catnip binge later, they ended up broke again. Out of the blue, Naimna shows up to see what's happening. And the moment Miley's brothers lay eyes on her, they practically fall head over heels. Moving on, Lady Kanon introduces Kenichi to Porridge, the guy she hired to supervise the construction. Porridge grumbles that she didn't need to come all the way out here, but Lady Kanon insists it's important because she's brought extra help. She explains that Kenichi, being a mage, will be able to speed up the work considerably, though Kenichi insists he's just a merchant. Still, Porridge sees no harm in the extra assistance, so he continues his work and hands Lady Kanon the equipment bill to review. As she pores over it, Primula glances at the bill and is immediately disgusted by the prices. She convinces Lady Kanon to let her take a closer look, and after reading every line, Primula is certain that Porridge is trying to rip Lady Kanon off. Porridge defends himself by arguing that he needs to make a profit, claiming there aren't any other merchants who could supply 1,000 axes. But Primula quickly cuts him off by turning to Kenichi and asking if he can source 1,000 axes. Kenichi heads to his store, purchases the axes, and then checks with Lady Kanon to see if the type of axe he found will do the job. She confirms that they're perfect, but she's curious about the price. Primula then informs her that it would cost only 1 silver coin per axe, a shockingly low rate. Lady Kanon double-checks with Kenichi, and he assures her it's simply a friend discount. Thrilled by the bargain, Lady Kanon decides to buy from Kenichi instead and promptly fires Porridge. Porridge flies into a rage and reminds her that he's representing the Thogalum Trading Company, warning that defying them won't end well. Kenichi recalls that Thogalum was behind all the issues at Primula's stall and that his influence runs so deep even the Lord occasionally calls on him. Still, with the canal's construction taking precedence, everyone gets down to work. Since Kenichi's backhoe will be running constantly, he makes sure to load it up with 3 basins worth of fuel. Just minutes later, the crew sets to work, and Kenichi's machine proves invaluable by completing tasks in minutes that would have taken hours otherwise. After a long day on the job, Kenichi cooks up a meal for his friends and even offers some to Lady Kanon. She's pleasantly surprised that he can whip up such tasty food right in the middle of the forest, and the meal turns out absolutely delicious. Kenichi notices Miley's brothers eyeing the spread from across the room, so he invites them to join in. But they're not the only ones hungry. Nearly all the workers are starving because the tavern they usually visit is all the way in the city and too pricey to reach. Feeling sorry for everyone, Primula comes up with an idea and asks Kenichi if she can use his recipe to feed all the workers. She promises to charge a fair price so that everyone can eat, and soon the worksite transforms into a lively party that even Lady Kanon can't help but love. Later that evening, Kenichi sets up a makeshift bath and offers it to Lady Kanon so she can freshen up. She's amazed that he managed to put together a proper bath out here in the woods. But just as Kenichi is about to leave, she grabs his arm and orders him to join her in the bath. Kenichi is trying his best to resist Lady Kanon, which is tough considering she's built like a sin. But technically, he's married to Primula, and he's got to take care of his little Blossom, so he can't just go around planting seeds like an overenthusiastic farmer. Lady Kanon admires his devotion to his family, remarking how nice it must be, while hinting that her own folks hardly ever cared about her unless it was time to auction her off. Kenichi shrugs, tells her that sounds rough, but not his problem, then exits the bathroom before she can throw another limited time offer his way. The next day, Kenichi wakes up early and immediately spots Lady Kanon hard at work. handing out food to all the laborers. For a split second, he secretly thinks about giving her a private round of applause. No sooner does that thought cross his mind than the girls swarm him, clearly picking up on his cheeky fantasy. But he tells them he wouldn't actually sleep with Lady Cannon because she's a married woman. And he's got enough brain cells to know that dipping into another man's cookie jar is how you end up on a missing person poster. Still, Lady Cannon isn't giving up easily. She knows Kenichi isn't falling for her right now, but she's determined to work her magic over the next month. Sooner or later, she's convinced his willpower will crumble like a cheap motel biscuit. Not long after, Porridge and one of his cronies return to the work site, complaining that none of the workers are hitting up the tavern they run for meals. Primula quickly explains it's because she started selling food at prices the workers can actually afford, so they no longer need to go to the tavern. She makes it clear that the loss of customers isn't her fault, it's all on them for charging way too much. If they want to win back business, they need to get real about their pricing. The day carries on as usual. Once the trees are felled, Kenichi hops into his backhoe and hauls all the wood and debris into storage. Progress on the canal is steady, and by noon, Lady Cannon's servants finally show up, swelling the ranks on site. With more people around, water starts becoming an issue. Rather than shelling out big bucks at his store, Kenichi strikes a deal with the local beast folk. They clue him in on a spring nearby, though reaching it requires cat-like agility. So, Kenichi offers them some alcohol in exchange for fetching water. The beast folk who can't get enough of the drink eagerly agree, and before long, his water woes are solved. As the beast folk celebrate their boozy success, Kenichi announces he's calling it a day and heading to bed. But just as he's about to leave, a tipsy Lady Cannon wraps her arm around him and starts dragging him toward the bedroom. Kenichi, however, holds his ground and, suppressing his own urges, uses the opportunity to get her to sign a legally binding agreement that forbids any more surprise advances. Shortly thereafter, Lady Cannon drifts off, so Kenichi quietly slips out of her guest room, intending to return to the main house, but Anemone blocks his path, complaining that he still carries Lady Cannon's scent. Meanwhile, Mr. Eupatorium's segment of the canal is completed right on time within the 1-month deadline and is officially inaugurated at a ceremony attended by the royal family. Kenichi had hoped to avoid the ceremony altogether, yet Lady Cannon pressured him into attending. Midway through the event, she unexpectedly calls on him to demonstrate the unique magic that made the project possible. With little choice, Kenichi summons his backhoe for a brief performance. The audience is left in awe as he skillfully balances a log on its arm, a feat so impressive it prompts whispers about where he learned such a trick. After the ceremony, Viscount Thunberja approaches Lady Cannon. Astonished that the mage who defeated Shaga is present in Astrantia, he had been convinced that she would eventually lose her land and be forced to flee. But she laughs in his face, retorting that his joke is almost as absurd as a tragic little caterpillar masquerading as a mustache. Kenichi watches this exchange, assuming it's merely typical noble rivalry. However, Primula notices something unsettling. An old man seated in Thunberja's carriage, the very same man who was stripped of his status in Dahlia after it was revealed he had hired Shaga to kidnap Primula. The following day, Kenichi meets with Mr. Eupatorium, Lady Cannon's husband, who comes forward to personally thank him for his invaluable assistance with the project so far. He admits that he hadn't maintained his territory well, but after nearly losing it due to the deadline, he's determined to start anew. He also mentions that he found one of the pictures Kenichi sold a while back and is eager to know how Kenichi created them. Kenichi proceeds to walk Mr. Eupatorium through the entire printing process, and Mr. Eupatorium listens with eager excitement, but little does he know, he's getting a masterclass from the same guy who keeps his wife dreaming about quality woodwork. Once Kenichi has taught him how to make the pictures, they resume their discussion. Mr. Eupatorium expresses his wish to hire Primula to manage Astrankia's finances. Grateful for the opportunity, Primula admits the workload would be too much on her own, so she asks if she may seek support from her father. Mr. Eupatorium, knowing that Mallow from the Mallow Trading Company is a major figure over in Dahlia, is more than happy at the thought of partnering with such a capable merchant. However, he hesitates, worried that linking up with one of Dahlia's most influential merchants might provoke Thogalum into action. Kenichi, who has been hearing a lot about Thogalum lately, asks why Mr. Eupatorium doesn't simply expel Thogalum from Astrankia since it's obvious he isn't liked. Embarrassed to admit it, Mr. Eupatorium confesses that with Astrankia's current budget, they can't afford a night order. If it ever came to a battle against Thogalum and his men, it's clear they would be outmatched. Still, Lady Cannon assures her husband that they stand a strong chance of winning since they have Kenichi and his magic machine on their side, and she's convinced Kenichi would be willing to fight for them. After all, he's her friend. Though Kenishi dislikes getting entangled in such troublesome affairs, he agrees to help fight Thogalum if the situation ever escalates. Deep into the night, Kenishi and the crew drag themselves back to their spot, looking half dead from exhaustion. Kenishi slaps their house back together like a makeshift puzzle, and right on cue, they get their hands on that top tier, no-nonsense grimoire Lady Canon promised. That means it's almost spell learning time for Anemone. Right now, they're going all out in rock paper scissors for the ultimate prize, the fresh soap. Primula wins, and let's be real, she ain't in it just to get clean. While the girls are taking a bath together, Nyamna remarks that Anemone's amazing magic must come from her mom. Kenishi agrees and asks Anemone if she knows anything about her real mother, but she simply replies that she does not. She explains that after her real mom passed away, she was raised by a kind woman on the streets, and now she is perfectly happy living with Kenishi. The next morning, Kenishi and Anemone head to an old wizard lady's place to register the high protection spell book for them. As Anemone flips through the book, Kenishi asks the crone if she has ever heard about a talented young mage who died on the streets roughly 10 years ago. The old lady, aware that Kenishi is looking for Anemone's mother, admits she does not recall such a death, but does remember a gifted black-haired mage named Silver Armeria who vanished around that time. Records show that Armeria once owned the very same high protection spellbook before it came to Anemone, and the old woman suggests that this is not a mere coincidence. Then the old witch tells Kenishi not to bother searching for Anemone's family because it is obvious she is in love with him. Kenishi is shocked by this remark and firmly tells the crone that he is no detective and that Anemone is like a daughter to him. Later, Kenishi returns home with Anemone and Miley, and as they settle in, Anemone decides to practice the high protection spell. She manages to conjure a barrier for just a second before it shatters, and she collapses in frustration. Upset by her failure, she confides in Kenishi that her stomach is hurting. Alarmed, Kenishi frantically searches online for some remedy for her stomach ache, but Miley notices something strange. She informs him that Anemone has just had her first period, and Kenishi quickly realizes what is happening. He hurries her back home, and fortunately, Primula arrives from work just in time. Primula then gives Anemone a heartfelt talk about periods and the changes in her body, and later, she comes running outside with a cheerful air, announcing to Kenishi that now she is ready to have babies. Kenishi tells her it's fine, but then Anemone suddenly blurts out that she wants his babies. Kenishi spits his coffee in shock and tells her she is at least 5 years too young to be involved with him. This upsets Primula, who grabs his ears and demands to know if he is serious. He explains that he is just keeping Anemone distracted for now, because when she grows up she will find another guy and settle down. A couple days after that, while Kenishi is working on the cliff behind his house, he spots a carriage gliding on water. He is totally surprised, and even more so when Mallow steps out. Mallow greets them and congratulates Primula on her booming business before insisting that he and Kenishi need to discuss how to handle Thogalum. Kenishi cuts off the overeager merchant, saying that before they jaw about business rivals, they must focus on something more important first. He sets up a picnic under a beach umbrella, and both Primula and Mallow get so caught up that they start brainstorming the business potential of that very umbrella. After that, Kenishi formally asks Mallow for permission to marry his daughter. The old man just laughs it off, saying he cannot do anything now because Primula has already barged into his house. They share a warm family moment, and later Kenishi throws a party in honor of his father-in-law. Soon enough, Mallow begins boosting his clout in the local market, and in the meantime, some old friends swing by to see Kenishi. Crouton shows up with Paul in tow. Paul is thrilled about Primula, but when he learns she ended up with Kenishi, he is crushed. He thought she had just been shy when she vanished after his proposal, but now he realizes he never stood a chance and accepts that Primula chose the better guy to spend her life with. With another solid ally by his side, Kenishi decides it is time to take on Thogalum. He heads to the market where Lady Canon and her husband are present, ready to confront the crooked merchant. Kenishi rolls up to Thogalum's trading stalls and asks if they buy goods, and an eager fella confirms it. He then announces he's got something to sell and promptly pulls out the corpse of a giant spider monster from his item box. This bold move throws the market into total chaos, and one merchant accuses Kenishi of stirring up trouble. Kenishi agrees with the accusation, and before long, Thogalum's goons show up armed for battle, with Thogalum himself soon making an entrance. His lackeys instantly identify Kenishi as the mage who's been messing with their business. Kenishi tells that lowlife he'll get even for harassing his wife, and Thogalum orders his goons to attack him since he's all by himself. But Kenishi isn't without backup. Paul, Crouton, and a few others step in to back him up. Thogalum remains cocky with his extra muscle. But when Vel leaps in front of Kanishi, all the catfolk are taken aback. Once they learn that the sacred bobcat is part of Kanishi's family, they turn tail and scatter, unable to face it. Thogalum retreats to his stronghold, and as Kanishi and his crew move in, they run into a gang of dog mercenaries who have no trouble taking on a bobcat. Vel grows visibly agitated upon seeing their leader, and Kanishi realizes he is the same bastard who hurt her back in the day. The dog mercs charge immediately, and Paul steps up to face their leader while Miley and Naina handle the rest of the pack with precise archery, with Crouton's buddy helping to push the dogs back. The head dog battles Paul evenly, and then Kanishi joins in by summoning his mini-excavator and starts wrecking Thogalum's estate, tossing stones at his lackeys to knock them out. Finding himself alone, Thogalum tries to make a run for it, but Kanishi gives chase. Once Thogalum is out in the open, Kanishi tucks away the mini-excavator and calls forth the big one to demolish his shop. As Kanishi tears down the building, the jerk begins to panic. Then Mallow steps in and tells him to stop, saying there's no need to destroy the building because they can repurpose it as their headquarters in the city. Thogalum curses Mallow and Kanishi, warning that the law will come down on them for trying to kill him. But Kanishi fires back, declaring that the moment Thogalum ordered his goons to unsheath their weapons, he became the one accused of plotting against the Viscount's life. The damn Thogalum just can't wrap his head around what's happening. And then the Viscount steps in, acting like Thogalum was out to kill him just to give Kanishi a reason to bail. The Viscount tells Thogalum that if he dumps all his property and scrams from the city for good, his crimes will be forgiven. Thogalum has no choice but to take the offer to save his skin, and before leaving, he tells Mallow that he's found a solid partner in Kanishi. He also warns Mallow to really think about why his daughter was kidnapped. Right then, a messenger rides in from the royal capital with word that the king has summoned the mage known as Kanishi immediately. The Viscount confirms the letter is legit, and Thogalum laughs, telling Kanishi that the nail that sticks out gets hammered. He leaves on that note, and Kanishi is left deep in thought over his words. Kanishi starts suspecting that the real reason Primula was kidnapped is that some powerful folks were jealous of the surge in the Mallow Company's value after his alliance with them. The idea that he might be the reason Primula was put in danger fuels his anger, and he vows to protect her from now on. Later that night, Kanishi tells Primula and Mallow that he won't be handing out any new gear for a while to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Primula refuses to believe that he's the reason she was endangered. She argues that taking risks is part of the game and even kidnappings are a cost of doing business. She tells Kanishi she doesn't care about the consequences because she's decided to spend her life with him. She says that sooner or later, the royals were bound to call him, and now she wants to ride with him and support him. The next day, Crouton takes his wife and daughter to his new home in Paul's territory. Anemone tearfully says goodbye to her best friend Mary, and afterward, Kanishi decides it's time to make his move. He packs up his gear and asks Lady Canon and the Viscount what would happen if he bolted instead of heading to the capital. They both freak out at the thought, knowing that running away would be seen as an act of rebellion and they'd be held liable for letting Kanishi escape. Realizing he's got no choice, Kanishi opts to go to the royal capital, and his girls aren't about to leave him no matter what. The crew rolls into the royal capital, and it looks absolutely gorgeous, though the roads are a total maze, so Kanishi ends up getting lost along the way. At one point, he bumps into a group of castle guards, so he flashes them the letter he received from the king. About an hour later, the guards return with the princess and her entourage trailing behind. The princess is overjoyed to finally meet the famous Kanishi, especially since it's only been about 2 weeks since her letter was sent. So everyone is surprised at how fast he arrived. Her advisors then demand an explanation for his speedy arrival. So Kanishi tells them he just drove in on his magical beast. No sooner does he say that than the princess insists she needs to see it for herself. So Kanishi summons his ride. It turns out even more impressive than she imagined, and she asks Kanishi for a spin in it. He agrees but warns her that it isn't smart to get rides from strangers. She jokes that it would be a blast if he decided to kidnap her, though Kanishi isn't about to become a wanted man. So he simply drives her back to the castle gates. The princess steps out of the car and her advisors start scolding her for riding in an unknown magic beast, warning that if anything happens to her, the king would have them all executed for not keeping her safe. But the princess fires back that they can quit if they don't like her style. She reveals that she really likes Kanishi and tells him he can call her Lilith. Since she's had a blast with him, she promises to give him any reward he desires. Kanishi thinks it over and asks Lilith if he can use a piece of the garden land to camp out. Lilith finds that request odd, since he could easily crash in the castle's lodgings. He explains that he has beast folk in his family, and most places won't let them stay together, so he wants a spot where they can all camp as a unit. The princess understands and agrees to let him set up camp in the garden. Since Kanishi arrived early, it looks like it might be a month before the king can grant him an audience. Kanishi and his crew are led to the part of the garden they'll be using, and as soon as Kanishi summons his house, Lilith gets all hyped and runs inside to check it out. Kanishi follows her and tries to talk her out of it, but Lilith's already made up her mind she wants to stay there for good. Her advisors warn her she's going too far, and Kanishi asks if she's really sure since he doesn't have much in the way of hospitality to offer. But Lilith is cool with just hanging out there, so if she really wants to stay, Kanishi won't stop her. He keeps setting up the house as planned. Now, all that's left is to build a bathroom. So Kanishi summons his backhoe and gets ready to dig. Out of nowhere, Lilith climbs in with him and plops herself on his lap. Kanishi uses the backhoe like he normally does, and once he's done, he carries the princess out. No sooner does she step out than her knight draws his sword and barks at Kanishi for daring to touch her so casually. The knight lunges at him, trying to off Kanishi, so he quickly summons a shield and pulls out a crossbow to hit back. The knight jumps back to dodge the bolts, but Anemone isn't about to let him get away with attacking Kanishi. She fires off a fireball. The royal mage steps in to block it, so Anemone gears up to fire another. But before she can, Lilith steps between them and orders everyone to stop fighting. She's impressed that Anemone can work magic at such a young age and formally introduces herself to learn what other spells Anemone can cast. Anemone replies that she can also do explosion magic, a big deal, because if she'd unleashed that, they'd have been reduced to BBQ-flavored confetti. That night, Kanishi kicks off dinner prep, and the princess is all smiles over the amazing smell, even though she doesn't know what that white stuff on her plate is called. Kanishi explains it's rice, and if she isn't down for rice, he could grab her some bread, but she insists rice is just perfect. Once the meal's ready, Kanishi dishes out a hearty serving of rice and curry to Lilith, and she can't get enough of it. She wonders if it's common for regular folk to chow down on such tasty grub, since she's never had anything like it before. Kanishi tells her that ordinary people rarely get their hands on spices because the spice syndicate keeps jacking up the prices. Lilith, who's well aware of the spice syndicate's hassle, asks Kanishi to break down which spices went into the dish, but he shrugs, saying he wasn't the one who cooked it. Instead, he offers to hook her up with a can of the spices so she can try to recreate the flavor later. Taking that as a challenge, the princess is more than eager to figure out the secret blend. In the meantime, she's really taken with the spoon and plate Kanishi gave her to eat on, so she asks if she can buy them. Kanishi agrees, but first he has a quick word with Primula. He explains that he'd normally sell the plate for 20 gold and the spoon for 10 gold. But if it's the princess buying, he can charge 20 gold each. He tells Princess Lilith it'll run her 40 gold for one set, and she thinks that's a steal, so she decides to buy 10 sets. Kanishi happily provides the dinnerware, and Lilith is a bit surprised because she never really bought it when he claimed he was a merchant. Now that she knows he's the real deal, she asks if he's got any off-the-books items for sale. Kanishi neither confirms nor denies it. At the same moment while he and Lilith are chatting, Anemone gets a little jealous of how close Kanishi is with her, and she slips in between them. Lilith can't figure out why Anemone's upset, since she assumed Anemone was Kanishi's daughter. Although Kanishi considers Anemone like family, they aren't related by blood. That night, Kanishi lets Lilith take a long, relaxing bath, while he hangs back to avoid getting caught up in another wild situation. He also opts not to crash in the same room as the princess, so he leaves Primula and Anemone with Lilith while he sets up camp with Naima and Miley. Soon enough, both Naima and Miley suddenly jump up, sensing something off nearby. The next morning, Kanishi is up bright and early, and a few minutes later Lilith rises too. She calls her maids over so they can get her dressed and kick off her day. Over the following days, Lilith keeps asking Kanishi for favors, like dealing with the rat infestation at the castle. So Kanishi heads down into the tunnels with a truckload of rat poison and wipes out over 1,000 rats in one go. The very next day, Primula organizes an auction for the giant spider corpse from Kanishi's item box. Later, we see Lilith challenges Kanishi to pull off a fake kidnapping to see if he really can. Kanishi grabs her and scales the castle walls to prove he could easily snatch her if he wanted to. The following day, Lilith decides to do something nice for Kanishi by serving him curry made by her chefs. It might look a little green, but it tastes amazing. So Kanishi gives a shout out to the chefs for nailing the curry spice. Out of the blue, Lilith asks Kenichi if he's got any food in his item box that her chefs can't replicate. Taking that as a challenge, he pulls out a box of high-end chocolates. The princess tries one and is blown away by its sweetness. So she hands a piece to her head chef and asks if he could recreate it. After tasting it, the head chef admits he couldn't whip up anything like that with his current skills. The next day, after finishing her duties, Lilith meets up with Kenichi for dinner. While they eat, Naima and Miley mention they sense something unusual out there. All the maids seem on edge too, so Lilith explains that rumors have been flying about the castle being haunted. Countless souls died protecting the royal family, and many likely held grudges even after passing on. So it makes sense there'd be at least a couple ghosts roaming around now. The maids are totally freaked out by the ghosts, so they beg Lilith to tell Kenichi to clear them out. Even though Lilith herself isn't bothered by ghosts, she knows her maids are on edge, so she asks Kenichi if he's got any way to banish one. Kenichi agrees, but only if Naima and Miley can come into the castle, since they're the only ones who can actually sense a ghost. Lilith accepts his condition, though Kenichi still isn't sure how to fight a ghost in the first place. After doing a bit of digging, Kenichi picks up a sprayer and fills it with holy water. As they stroll through the halls, Naima and Miley point to a shadowy corner and tell him they sense something there. So he sprays the area, and they confirm the ghost is gone. With that problem solved, Lilith leads Kenichi to the maid quarters where another ghost is rumored to be lurking. Once again, Naima and Miley pinpoint the spot, so Kenichi sprays it. And soon all the maids say they don't feel any ghostly presence. Kenichi isn't sure if he's actually banishing spirits or if it's just a placebo effect. But he keeps moving through the castle, spraying holy water wherever the girls indicate. The final stop is the queen's bedroom, since she's been complaining about not being able to sleep. Kenichi feels a bit uneasy about being in her room, but Lilith assures him it's fine, so he gets on with the exorcism. Meanwhile, Vel can't stop staring at a vase on a desk. Kenichi picks it up and tries spraying it, but nothing happens. He then tells Lilith that the queen might want to ditch that vase because he can't seem to clear the spirit from it. Lilith thanks Kenichi for his help, and as a reward, grants him permission to browse any of the magic books in the library. However, they can't check out any books because that's strictly forbidden. Kenichi isn't planning on stealing them, though since copyright laws don't exist in this world, he decides to pirate them instead. He pulls out a photocopier and starts scanning all the pages so they can read them later, and after 4 hours, they've managed to copy about 35 books. It's getting late, so Kenichi and Anemone finally leave the library, only to find a maid waiting outside. Her job is to make sure they didn't swipe any books since they're extremely valuable, so she checks every shelf. Later that evening, Kenichi ends up in a private room with the princess and one of her maids. The princess is fully convinced she figured out his type, and surprised it's Malin. She looks him dead in the eye and tells him he can do whatever he wants with her. Kenichi admits Malin is exactly his type, but says no because he's already married to Primula. That kind of loyalty hits Lilith like a slap from reality. She's heard all the weird stories about nobles using magic tools to mess around behind their partner's back. So now she's staring at his item box like it's hiding a dungeon full of secrets. Kenichi shrugs and tells her he's got nothing to hide. Then, just to make things more awkward, he buys Malin an outfit that screams trouble. Malin blushes and quietly tells him to take it slow. He steps in real smooth, and then all hell breaks loose. There's yelling, flailing, maybe someone trips over a chair. By the time it's over, it's pretty clear Kenichi just landed another royal deal, and Lilith looks way more involved than she planned to be. That same day, the time finally comes for Kenichi to meet with the king, and we see the group being guided to the meeting place. Thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, it makes all the difference.